Thank you very much for being on time. We're always on schedule, which is also nice. Welcome to the Ghent City Hall. For the people attending the official dinner tonight, you'll see some other parts as well. And this is the room where the City Council is meeting. And we couldn't find a better location to talk about the topic of this mini-conference, Transparency in the City of People, because in the different working groups and projects that we tackle within the Knowledge Society Forum, we always touch upon where democracy and the challenges on democracy are meeting the technical principles and biases. So we're very happy to host this conference, and that we found this incredible array of speakers. Albert Meijer, Gerry Smits. We also have a coffee break, so no panic. Aral Balkan, and then we have a panel discussion on the challenges that are put forward today. And we end with Etienne Auger, because in the last KSF we were talking about the importance of science fiction, so we took it upon ourselves to find a speaker to say some sensible stuff on science fiction. If you want to participate, that's of course possible, otherwise it would be a poor form for a conference on democracy. So the network and the password for the Wi-Fi are the same as yesterday and this morning. So it will also be streamed live. So if you would like to inform your colleagues, your peers, your network, you can tweet this or share this link. The presentations and the audio recordings will also be available for download later on through the website of Eurocities. And we have the slido.com, which is the tool that can be used to put forward any questions. But you can also have questions through the microphone there. What you need to do is push the big red button. You will see the light burning, and then you can speak. Because this is a city council, and not all members of city council are very aware what the other city council members are doing, only 3 mics can be on at the same time. So, yeah, let's take that into account as well. That was what I wanted to say. The toilets is over there. The coffee break will be over there. So that's all for me, and I'm proudly to present Mr. Albert Meijer from Utrecht University.
Bart, thank you very much for inviting me over here to talk with you about democracy in the smart city. It's really a beautiful city here. We just had a visit to the library, which is a very modern institution with a lot of attention for digital information. And now we're back in this very traditional hall. So I think this is very, very interesting to see both the ancient side of cities and the modern side of cities. And actually that connects very well with my talk, because I also would like to talk about both the ancient and the modern side of cities, but then not so much when it comes to the buildings or the physical infrastructure, but it's much more about the democracy, the way that citizens are engaged in processes of debating issues, in decision making and implementing these decisions. Democracy emerged in Greece in the 5th century before Christ. But it's after some periods where there was very little attention for democracy, there's a lot of attention now. But I think this digital age demands more attention for democracy, and I would like to discuss some of these issues. I'm a professor at Utrecht University in the Netherlands. My field is public administration, or public management as we sometimes call it, and I have a specific interest in public innovation. So I've looked a lot at smart cities, the use of technology in cities to tackle all kinds of wicked problems. And I'm sure that's what you've been discussing over the previous years, and what you will be discussing in the rest of this conference. So those are some of the topics that I'm also highly interested in. But there's one topic I'm specifically interested in, and that's the role of people in these smart cities. But I've just heard over lunch that's also something that most of you are specifically interested in. So I hope this talk connects well to your conversations. I'm not going to focus on the latest technologies, the latest gadgets, the latest technological trends. I'm going to discuss principles of democracy. So that is really what my talk is about. My introduction will be a little bit about smart cities, but the core of my presentation will be about what is democracy and what kind of democracy do we want in an information age. So that's really what I would like to discuss with you. But let me start with a brief introduction about smart cities, and I'm sure you're very well aware of all kinds of discussions about smart cities, but briefly I would like to present my perspective. What struck me, if we look at smart cities, is that there's many pictures like this. If you go on the internet and you Google smart city, you get all of these wonderful images with self-driving cars, ecological cities, smart buildings, etc. I'm sure many of you have seen these pictures. But the interesting thing is, what is lacking in this picture? People, exactly. And that's not a coincidence. There's in many of these pictures, there's much more attention for technology, but you see very few people in these smart cities. Another thing is, if you look at the origins of the smart city discourse, which started after 2006, 2007 in the United States, we see that there's very much a managerial focus. What they say in the literature is that the focus for smart cities started with big companies like Siemens, Cisco, IBM, and actually their core idea was that in a time of economic trouble, between 2005, 2012 probably, they needed a new market to sell their technology. So that's when IBM, Siemens, Cisco, Philips, other companies start developing this discourse about smart cities as a way to sell their technology. And you see all these market analysis where they say that there's a market of billions of dollars for smart city technology. But that also meant that, at least in this early smart city discourse, there was no attention for the fact that a city is not the same as an organization. Their perspective on a city was very much a managerial perspective. They talked about realizing the objectives of the city with technology, which for an organization is not a very strange way to talk. But for a city, it's quite different, because the city does not have objectives. A city government may have objectives, but they're always temporary and they're always open for debate. A city is an ecosystem with different actors, with different values, with different power positions, which makes it very different from an organization which has a clear focus. But especially in the early discussions about smart cities, there was very little attention for these aspects of smart cities. They talked about realizing the objectives, but they didn't ask the question, who owns the city? Who decides what the objectives are? Where are we heading? So after that, there was a lot of discussion, and a lot of people made critical analysis of this early smart city discourse. Is this not?
No, it's okay.
Okay. You may know this book by Adam Greenfield. If you don't, please look it up. It's very interesting. It's Against the Smart City. And Adam Greenfield and some others expose the idea that it's really about neoliberal ambitions. It's about realizing these managerial objectives of the smart city with very little attention for the democratic aspects, for the human side of the city. And Adam Greenfield has a list of about, I think, 10 objections to the smart city, but I would like to summarize them in 4 key points. They say one key problem with the smart city discourse that we had then, but I would actually say many of his points of criticism are still quite relevant. First point of criticism is that the smart city discourse is too generic. So what he said is there's very little attention for the fact that cities are different. Spatially they are different. They're different in history. They're different in welfare. They're different in institutions. They're different in culture. So cities are very different. But most of these smart city solutions really present a smart city out of a box, a general solution. And actually the huge success of SAP, the system that's used in organizations to organize business processes, is really something that all these companies strive for. They would actually like to be the SAP of smart cities. One general solution that can be implemented by all cities, so that all cities have a same approach to smart cities. So that's the first thing that Adam Greenfield criticizes. Second one, he says there's too much emphasis on technological aspects. It's not strange, because technology was really what it started with. As I said, the smart city discourse was about selling technology to urban governments. So there's a lot of attention for technology and very little attention for making the technology work to tackle societal problems. And I have, since 1997, I've been investigating the use of information technology in the public sector. And if there's one thing that we know, is that it's often the success or failure does not so much depend on technological features, it depends much more on the fit between technology and implementation context. So it's much more about organizing technology than about developing technology. So that's the second criticism, it's too technological. The third one, and it's also something I refer to, it's too managerial. It's not about politics, it's not about the diverse values, the value plurality of modern societies. It's very much about a managerial orientation. And the fourth one, it's too neoliberal. It's very much only focusing on efficiency. There's very little attention for other values that play a key role in modern society, such as sustainability, inclusivity, transparency, which is the theme of this meeting. So it's very much a neoliberal discourse. So Adam Greenfield, and he was not the only one, started really criticizing this tech company-dominated discourse about the smart city, and started exposing some of the key assumptions that they felt were incorrect. So in reaction to that, and I think that's also where most of you are, we see these other images of smart city coming up. And I think that's very important also that we start constructing images of a smart city where, as you see here, people appear. So you see also other names coming up, like the human smart city, or the wise city, or the bottom-up smart city. So it's these other terms that are less dominated by technology, less dominated by managerial attentions, more attention for humans. And I would say the alternative approach highlight firstly that the city is about people. Secondly, people own the city. And third one, and that's also a very interesting one for my presentation today, people are not only the object, but also the subject of smartness. And that's something that you have to really let sink in, because that's crucial. The original smart city technologies, the ones that IBM and Cisco were talking about, were really about influencing people to do things that we collectively saw as desirable. So that fits the current nudging discourse, that fits very many other discourse about influencing people on the basis of psychological analysis, so that we can make people do what we want them to do. For example, make people throw garbage in a garbage can instead of throwing them out on the ground, or behaving properly when they're late out at night instead of making a mock. So the original discourse was very much about people as the object of smartness, whereas the new discourse about the wise city, the human smart city, the bottom-up city, is much more about people as the subjects of smartness, the ones that can really form the smartness. So what we see in these new forms, there's more attention for the idea that there's more a democratic approach to the smart city. It's about, and that's from Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, government of, for, and by the people. I still really like that saying. It's classical saying in American political science, but I think it very much applies to what we're doing here as well. Government of, for, and by the people. But, and that's where my presentation comes in, I think we often have naive or and therefore even dangerous notions of what democracy is. Many people believe that if we have smart apps that we can do a citizen consultation and create more democracy, or that we can have some forms of what they sometimes call push-button democracy, have these referendums online where people can vote on what they're saying. And what my key message today is that if we want to build democracies in an information age, build democracy in a smart city, it's not about only creating something new, it's about embedding the new in the old. And in that sense, this room is actually beautiful because it's a very, very old room, but still we're using new technology. But so there's sort of a synergy between the two. And you could also say at a larger level here in Ghent, there's old buildings like City Hall, but there's also new buildings like the library. But those are really the patterns of thinking that we need. So it's not only about replacing old democracy by new democracy, it's about embedding new democratic mechanisms in old democratic mechanisms. And to do that, I would like to tackle two key issues. And I'm not pretending to cover all the relevant issues that we need to talk about when we're talking about democracy in the smart city. But I think there's two issues that are of specific relevance. And the first one is direct and indirect democracy. So we're here in the room where the City Council convenes. So that's a form of indirect democracy where the representatives discuss issues that are relevant to the city of Ghent. But direct democracy is where people can participate directly in decision-making processes. And if we look at this debate about direct and representative democracy, we see that on the one hand, they're technological, and I sort of use this distinction between talk, decision, action. That's from Brunson, a Norwegian scholar, and he actually uses it in a very broad way to understand decision-making processes in society. But I think this distinction between talk, decision, and action also fits very well, can help very well to analyze what democracy is about. Because democracy is, on the one hand, about having a debate, having a good debate about the various options, the various values that are at stake, the various power interests. It's about making decisions, voting, making a decision in a city council, and it's about action. It's about realizing the issues the decisions that have been made. And if you look at these three elements, talk, decision, and action, you see that from a technological perspective, some interesting things are being put forward. The idea that a massive debate was not possible. Well, in Switzerland they found some ways to have a massive debate on the city square, but most other countries we consider the idea of having a debate with thousands of people as something unfeasible. But increasingly, massive debates can take place on the internet. So there can be large consultations, as many countries do now, where they have all kinds of people providing their input about certain measures that could be taken. So one of the things that technology can bring is massive debate. Second thing, and it's probably even more obvious, direct voting. We still go to the voting booth. In the Netherlands, we still vote on paper again, because there's we don't trust the voting computers, which is actually quite also I find quite interesting, but something we'll discuss on another occasion. But the internet offers great opportunities for voting, and I do that regularly with my students. I use some kind of app on the internet and let people vote on different issues, and that's something that you can do really easily, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with that. So the idea of having direct voting with millions of people is now something that can be realized at low cost. And the third one is coordinated action. Organizing things together used to be very costly when we did not have the information technology. But now, and sometimes Wikipedia is mentioned as an example, we can work together on a very large scale and create something like an encyclopedia. So we see when it comes to technology, there's all kinds of ideas how democracy can be strengthened on these three dimensions. But the same thing applies to democratic innovation. Here in Belgium, David van Rijbroek was one of the people that really argued for a new form of democracy, which was based on lottery, actually, on drawing lots and randomly selecting citizens to discuss issues instead of electing them. He wrote his book. It's called Against Democracy, I think, yeah. And it's actually really interesting book, because he makes the case that the whole idea of representation may not be as adequate as we tend to think. So he started with what they're called G1000, bringing randomly selected citizens together and let them discuss the issues that are relevant for a city. And that was popular here in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands, especially the city of Amersfoort. They did all these initiatives where they started to find new ways to re-engage citizens with democracy. The second one is referendums. I won't talk much about it, but there's a lot of people that talk about referendums as re-engaging citizens with democracy. And what is in the literature called the do democracy, where it's not so much about democracy by voting or discussing, by acting. For example, citizens that say, okay, we're really fed up with how all the garbage that we see in our neighborhood. We're not going to vote. We're not going to ask city government to do something about it. We'll organize ourselves and we'll clean the neighborhood. So then you see citizens really do something together. So there's all these ideas, and what I think is the challenge to not replace our present forms with these ideas, but enrich our forms of democracy with some of these ideas. And I'll give you one concrete example from my own city, City of Utrecht, and it's about the city conversations about energy. Situation was the following. Some citizens said we want more clean energy in the city. We want windmills because we want to be a carbon neutral city. So they argued for more windmills. But then other citizens were saying we want fewer windmills because they make a lot of noise and they're really ugly. So they were against them. Local government didn't really know what to do at that moment. And then they listened to David van Rijbroek here from Belgium and said, well, maybe we can do something with this idea of the lottery, of randomly selecting citizens and let them decide. And what they did is they said the objective is clear. The objective is that Utrecht should be a carbon neutral city by the year 2030. But we'll let it up to the citizens to decide how they can do that. And if they come with a plan that's within our objective and within our financial budget, we'll realize it. So then these citizens were selected, and well, some of them dropped out, but in the end they had quite a diverse group of 200 citizens that were in rooms like this, selecting all the energy options. They were informed by experts, they got all kinds of presentations, they had a lot of discussions among themselves, and in the end they drafted an energy plan which was in line with the city's objective and which was indeed within the budget requirements. So then the city government said, said, okay, we'll adopt it because that's what we promised. We'll adopt the plan that was drafted by the citizens. And the city council was in a bit of an awkward position because they are representatives and they're supposed to vote independently. But they also felt that it was a plan that was broadly supported by citizens, so they adopted it as well. So what and you may have all kinds of questions about this case, we can talk about that later, but the point I want to make is this is, I think, a good example of how representative democracy managed to create a framework, and within this framework, direct democracy could add value because they managed to go beyond this tension between having windmills or not having windmills. So citizens really made a difference because they could draft the plan. It was a randomly selected group of citizens, but it was not against the will of the council, but it was in line with the council. So together, these two democratic mechanisms resulted in a legitimate outcome of a decision-making process. So that's my first conclusion. Democracy in a smart city requires smart connections between representative and direct democracy. I think that's one of the key puzzles that you have to look in all your cities. How can we enrich our representative democracies with new forms of direct democracy? And I give you one example based on David van Rijbroek's ideas about lottery. A second issue, which is even more difficult, I think, is the relation between public and private interests. And I must say I'm still really struggling with this as well. I think it's one of the key issues that we're facing in the information age. If you look at it, traditionally public and private interests are seen as separate domains. And if we look at the rules that we have in our modern societies, we really emphasize that, for example, a president such as Donald Trump is not supposed to profit from the fact that he's president, that in the form of many people staying at his hotel in Washington, because these two things should be separate. He should not use his presidency to make money with the Trump Corporation. And the same thing in many of our countries. Ministers are not supposed to be connected to private companies. They have to let go of all their connections. So there's a clear disconnect. At the same time, citizens are also supposed, when we have hearings, citizens are not supposed to be lobbyists. There's lobbyists that talk on the behalf of corporations and private interests, and citizens talk on behalf of their own interests or the interests of groups of citizens. So citizens are allowed to vote, and companies are not allowed to vote. We vote on the idea that we have a one man, one vote principle, or one human, one vote principle. And the companies cannot vote, and people can. So we have clear distinctions. So within the history of democracy, all kinds of rules have been developed to deal with the distinction between the public and the private, and to make sure that democracy is not being hijacked by private interests. So political scientists really love studying these issues. That's a core issue in the history of democracy. What's happening now is actually two different things. I would say on the one hand, the threat is even increased, and at the same time, there's new possibilities to connect private and public interests. So this may sound quite paradoxical, but I hope I can convince you of this. The first one is the easiest one. The threat is increasing. I think many of us are having these discussions about how Facebook influences democratic processes, how Cambridge Analytics used Facebook to influence people and send targeted messages to specific groups. So we see that these large platforms are really influencing our democratic processes. So what we need, and I know that's one of the key issues here, Marianne is really interested in this as well, I know, is that we need new forms of regulation to protect our public interests in our cities against these private corporations. And it is quite difficult, because many of these private corporations have their bases in the United States. They're very good at buying promising startups and getting all the rights to their technology. And at the same time, they are really trying to influence processes here. I know that IBM, for example, also offered the city of Utrecht to arrange everything they needed for a smart city. But I would think that is very dangerous, because it puts a lot of power with IBM, because they would have all the information, and they would control all the technology. So there's a huge task here, and that's why I think a platform like this, Eurocities, is really relevant, because we need to push for new forms of regulation, where things like Creative Commons are very important. I know that cities like Eindhoven and Amsterdam are emphasizing that when technology is being developed in the public domain with public money, it should be open technology and the data should be open. So this whole idea of openness should be a guideline to regulate these companies. So there's a whole set of questions here, and I think it's extremely important that those issues are being tackled here. National governments are quite slow at dealing with them, so I really think that action is needed to protect our democracy. So that's one side of the story. The other side of the story is that we also see that in cities there's many small companies that have a lot of ideas, that really feel a strong connection with the cities they live in. In Utrecht we have quite a few small companies. I know they have in other cities, in Ghent, Eindhoven, Almere, they have all these small companies. And these people are really assuming a double role. On the one hand, they're citizens of these cities, but at the same time they're also entrepreneurs with lots of ideas. And I think that smart cities are also about connecting to these local entrepreneurs, connecting to the energy that they have, and using this energy of all these local people to strengthen our systems. And I will give you an example of something in Utrecht, something that I'm personally also involved in, which I think is a good example. It's a non-digital example again, but it's, I think, a good example of how the energy of entrepreneurs can be beneficial to the dynamics of a city. What you see here is an area right in what you could call the new center of Utrecht. It's not the old traditional center, but it's very close to it. A lot of houses are being built there. There's a lot of urban development. But what we also see is there are very few green facilities. And I know that's a problem in many cities. We're building all these houses, but we also need room for recreation. We need some space, some air in cities. What some landscape architects that live in these neighborhoods, where I also live, did, is they came up with the idea of what they call circular park. They said, well, we cannot bring all kinds of new green facilities to the city, but what we can do is connect the existing facilities. So they use their professional expertise as landscape architects to draft a plan about building a circular park in this area. So what you see is that all the green zones are being connected through a route, and we'll still have to see how we can do this, to build a circular park. And some of the architects even got some money out of it from local government to redevelop the plan. One of the architects was even asked by local government to be a project manager at local government for a while. Well, you could say, well, that's not what we want. He was a citizen from that neighborhood, so he should not have a triple role actually as a citizen, an entrepreneur, and somebody working for local government. At the same time, you could also say he's a person who's really engaged and who brings value to this neighborhood, because this is the type of thing that he could develop on the basis of his expertise, but city government had not done it. So what I think is here, in the second challenge, democracy in a smart city requires smart connection between private and public interests of citizens. And then I'm talking about these small companies regulating the large interests, but smart connection between the private and public interest. And this is actually quite a difficult issue, because it interferes with all kinds of systems of regulation. But I think smartness is really about using these competencies that are present in the city. So to wrap up, what I believe is that democratic innovation is not about only bringing something new, it's about connecting old and new mechanisms. That's my first message. Second one, democracy is about connecting citizens to institutions. It's not only about deinstitutionalizing our societies. Yesterday I did a talk about something very, very different, but my key point there was we have to protect our institutions, and our institutions are under threat by many populist politicians. So these institutions are very valuable. At the same time, they need to be innovated. So it's about connecting these institutions to citizens. Third one, entrepreneurship can challenge but also strengthen democracy. We have to find smart ways where the local connection of entrepreneurs can be helpful to strengthen our democracies without giving up our democracies and giving all our values to large corporations. Fourth one, there is no one-size-fits-all model. Democracy is about building local legitimacy. I haven't focused on that very much, but if you may have seen, some of the issues were really specific about, or specific cases in Utrecht. I'm not saying that you can copy the circular park or copy the way that we organized our city debate about energy. But it's learning about the mechanisms, but translating these mechanisms to your local context. I don't think smart city out of a box or democracy out of a box is going to work. It's about building local democracy. And the final point is, in the end, democracy is about future making. That's a term that we see popping up in science more recently. There's a lot of emphasis on decision making, about what can we decide. But what more and more people are saying is that decision is actually only a late stage of the democratic process. The first stage, and probably more important stage, is opening up different venues of thinking. And that's why one of my colleagues, Martin Heyer, is working on futuring, thinking about different futures for the city. And I think that we should use these democratic mechanisms to engage in processes of futuring, to engage in debates with our citizens about what kind of city do we imagine, what kind of cities do we want. And then we can start looking at the smart technologies and the smart ways of engaging democracies to make them work. I wish you all the best with all your discussions, and I don't know how much time is there left for a question? Yeah, so there's time for questions. Thank you very much for your attention. Okay, who would like to ask a question? Yes? To push the red button.
You talk about smart solutions for public-private. Oh, wow! You talked about smart solutions for public-private. How'd you put it?
Collaborations, yeah.
Collaborations, yes. But can you talk a bit more about that? Because I think we all agree that should be done. But the challenge is how, where does the local jurisdiction begin and end? Companies are collecting the data already. They have all the data. We cannot just say no. So how to do that?
I don't have the full answer because it is a difficult topic. But some of the ideas are, for example, that that we need to create what they call in innovation management, create niches. So for certain options, such as developments in new neighborhood, you can create a rule-free or rule or a zone with limited rules. So you can say when it comes to neighborhood development, we're going to apply fewer rules when it comes to entrepreneurial engagement, so that there will be more options to collaborate. So in terms of the rules, we need to open up what they sometimes call strategic niches, where we can experiment or create specific zones where there are less strict regimes that inhibit forms of entrepreneurial engagement. And this has to be done in a very targeted way so that we can make it work, but that can open up the possibilities for this type of engagement. So working with these rule-free zones is one point. Second one is also to having within your organization creating new connections, because what we're seeing is that often citizen engagement and economic affairs are very different departments. So we'll have to find new ways within urban governments to make these connections between different parts of the company, of the organization. And what we see, well, again, I'm not saying Utrecht is the best city, but I see some I know it best, so I know some interesting examples. I'm sure there's interesting examples in your cities as well. But what they're doing more and more is they're focusing on the key tasks. For example, creating a more inclusive city. And they form teams of civil servants from economic affairs, from citizen engagement, from environmental affairs, that work together along these challenges. And that also creates new opportunities to work together and to create use both the economic dynamics and the citizen engagement dynamics to engage. Yeah, so those are some of the mechanisms, and a key overall requirement is to get some support from the top of the organization to work with these types of solutions. Because that can often be a problem if the civil servants start experimenting, that they're not covered by the top of the organization. So the top of the organization has to be open to these ways of experimenting, and then we can develop new sets of rules and new collaborations that can make this work. I know it's not a very concrete plan with a set of bullets, but those are, I think, the lines that we have to think about. Yes, please.
No, they don't like the back row. Here we go. All right. First of all, thank you for that presentation. That was great. Just to go back to the gentleman's point earlier, because he said we all want these public-private partnerships, and of course we can't say no to all of this data collection, etc. I just want to say, of course we can say no. And if we're talking about public-private partnerships, maybe one of the conversations we should be having is whether or not we should be in a partnership, whether a democratically elected government should be in a partnership with corporations that it's supposed to be regulating, or whether that relationship is something different to a partnership, where one should have more power over the other. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say it's the classical discussion about working in partnerships or commissioning certain assignments. So that could be a way. But what I tried to show with the example of the circular park is that this would never have happened in a traditional way, because local government was not thinking along these lines, so they would never have commissioned this type of assignment to the people in that area. So what you miss if you only work with commissioned assignments is that you miss much of the creativity and the new ideas of local entrepreneurs that could add value to the city. So in that sense, it's not longer a simple vertical relation, it's more horizontal relations where entrepreneurs such as these landscape architects in Utrecht can really add value. At the same time, to make it very clear, I'm not naive. That's also why I did bring in the second point. And I'm very aware that there's huge corporate interest, that they want all the data, that want all the data about us individually. They find all ways to control that. And that's why for that part, I like the solution that's propagated by Eindhoven and Amsterdam that really emphasize we need strict rules when it comes to these collaborations in the public sphere, where there can be no discussion about the fact that it's all open data and it's open source software. So we also need some general rules, but I don't think we can go back to the traditional vertical relation between government and corporations.
And so would you say then that in that partnership, the governments, the democratically elected governments should be in charge, or should the corporations be in charge?
Now I think from my talk it should be clear that government is in charge, but it's more complicated than before. I had a discussion at a scientific conference last year about the notion of a platform, and what I find really dangerous with Facebook, and that's why we're having this discussion, is that the platform as the basis for new interventions is being commercially controlled. And that's what I find one of the most dangerous developments. I know in Rotterdam, apologies, many of my examples come from the Netherlands, but in Rotterdam, they're really thinking about building a virtual Rotterdam, because they're saying we want the foundation for information services in Rotterdam to be controlled by public interest. And I think that's a very interesting observation, because the risk is that we're, well, the same way that shopping malls are being controlled by private interests, we risk that the virtual versions of our cities will be controlled by private interests that control the platform. And that is something that we need to be really aware of. The only thing I want to show in my conversation, I'm not sort of a pro-commercial interest person. Actually, on the other side, I used to be part of a squatting movement, really activists, etc. But I've seen some of these people, actually, they're all also from the squatting movement, that are building these new companies that have really interesting ideas. Very few, they don't really aim to become the next Facebook, but they have great ideas for the city. But sometimes, because of the rules that we just discussed in relation to the previous question, they cannot add this value. So we have to find a way so that these people can add value without selling out the city. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Albert Meyer. So, thank you very much for, now, we set out the scene. We know what challenges are there. The next gentleman we invited to speak is Gerry Smits. I learned to know him as my counterpart in the city of Antwerp, but despite that, we're still on speaking terms. So, and he does some very interesting things with oranges. So, his talk is about blockchains and why we should ignore it or we shouldn't ignore it. So, we'll be a bit smarter at the end of his talk. Gerry?
Did you see how good he was to fill that gap until I had the computer ready? He was in the music industry before, huh? How's the sound on this thing? Is that good? Back there? Yeah? Okay, cool. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for not running away, because the sun out there is beautiful. And in here it's something to talk about the simplest subjects of all time, blockchain. Bart briefed me, he said you got 40 minutes, 15 of those should be questions. So I got 25 minutes to explain the most difficult thing in the world. Wish me luck. I'm going to start with a little story. This is me. Well, not me. This is how I felt. I lived in the UK for a long time, in London. This is how I felt when I moved back to London, to Antwerp in Belgium. because I had to jump through so many administrative hoops to prove that I had paid Social Security in another country, which is part of the same, or for now at least, part of the same sort of regulatory unit. And this is how I felt a couple of months later, or a couple of weeks later, when I transferred some money from my English bank account to my Belgian bank account, and realized that along the way, all of a sudden I became poorer due to exchange rates and fees, etc., etc. And this is how I felt sort of last year. About a year ago, I went to Athens with my family. I took an Uber, a fantastic app, but immediately the driver started to complain about how hard he had to work and how he dependent was on Uber's decisions about what fees they were going to take, etc., etc. And it's these kind of things that, like inefficient data management, central powers that are really powerful, growing inequality as well. A couple of the reasons why I think that blockchain is, or blockchains are, potentially totally fundamental. And the P, or I should say wondrous and potentially totally fundamental, but the P is important. Who am I to make this statement? I'm just a dude. I'm not an academic. I'm a guy who tries to make sense of the world of technology and digital, and tries to help organizations and businesses to get more out of digital, whatever that means. I'm a freelancer, I'm independent, I don't belong to a consultancy firm, although I guess you could call me, with the C word, a consultant. The last couple of years, 2 years or so, I've been enamored by blockchain. It keeps me awake at night. So I've written a book about it, in Dutch, unfortunately for most of you, I guess, but that's what the publisher wanted. That's where they saw the market potential. But I've written a book about blockchain to see what actually can be done with it, and to take it away from the field of technology, because there's too much crap being said about blockchain, I think, from a technological point of view. So what I'm going to do today, or what I'm going to attempt to do today, is to explain what blockchain actually is, what are its building blocks, its components, and how that could have an impact on the way we live together as people. I'd avoid the word democracy because I'm not that smart to make that jump, but I want to see how it could work on the way we work together, we live together as people, as a society, so to speak. And then questions. Let's aim for 15 minutes. Bart, you give me the sign, okay? Yeah. Big caveat, I'm not a technical profile, okay? If there are any technical profiles in the room, I do apologize already. I'm not a techie. I can sometimes pretend I understand technology, but I understand for what it can do. I try to make sense of the technology world and see what potential impact it can have. Okay, so what is blockchain? This is my view on it. Sometimes I explain it with this, and I say, well, blockchain is a kind of database technology, where a bunch of computers in a decentralized network all do the same thing. They verify if something is true, or they verify if a transaction can be done, and they store it, and they make the transfer of the transaction happen. And at any point, any computer in the room has the latest version of the truth, the database. It's kind of true, but no one ever remembers it. So I've done this recently. I've decided to role-play blockchain. So we're going to do a role-play of blockchain. Do not despair. What's your name? Annalisa. All right. I'm going to do a transaction of an asset, something of a value, whatever, an orange, to Annalisa. And we're all going to play blockchain. That was it. That was blockchain. Thank you. Thank you for accepting. That was blockchain. Because if I ask you now, who has that orange, you say, Annalisa. She has a difficult name, right? Annalisa, right? And that's basically what blockchain kind of tries to do. Now imagine that you're a computer in a network, in a decentralized network. You don't know each other. Not everybody here knows everybody. But you've still decided to use something common, like your eyes, to register that transaction, and your brain to store it. Let's call that a protocol, a consensus protocol to agree how we decide what is actually true or not. But as a bunch of people in this room, we've all seen that transaction happen, and we can all validate that this happened. It's roughly that, very, very black and white in layman's terms. It's a way to register what actually happened. It's a common vision of the truth that we've done amongst ourselves. And we didn't need a government of oranges or a bank of oranges or whatever to finalize that. We've done it amongst ourselves using a technology. There's a couple of technical issues that are, or technical specialities with blockchain that are very hard to explain with an orange. But I'm going to focus on the last one. There's a couple of things why it's special, why this technology keeps me awake at night. One is that this runs on a bunch of computers, not just on one computer, and that should make it more fallible, or more stable, I should say. Second one, there's this quite advanced cryptography and technical shizzle that I don't really understand, but it's got to do with how security and how integrity is built into the technology itself and how that gets stronger the bigger the database gets. But there's a third element, and especially for this subject matter, I think that's much more important. And for that, I'm going to role play blockchain again. Who's the owner of that orange? Ooh, it's hard to say who was first. You said, huh? Yeah, I'm going to give it to you. You said she was the first one to answer correctly. Rebecca, and she gets a reward for that. So what we've just done is I did a call to the network. I said, who's the owner of that orange? And Rebecca was the first one to answer correctly. And in return for her good behavior, she gets a reward in the same value system of this network. Oranges, tangerines, satsumas, whatever. Because she could have said, it's mine. But she didn't. Because she acted on best behavior. She acted in the interest of the network. Because there's a value system in this thing, oranges in this particular case, that make her act to the desired behavior. And that's a bit strange, and it quite often gets overlooked in discussions about blockchain, but one of the fact that this database technology has not been hacked as such yet, or potentially not, is that there's an element of, rather than have central control and central protection for databases, you've got this weird mix of cryptography and the fact that there is a value system attached to this network in which people get rewarded for desired behavior. And that's all got to do with game theory and incentivization. And that's something that makes this thing a lot more human than we think it is. And I liked your point that you said it's about human people, not so much about technology. I'm an amazing fan of user-centric and human-centric and design thinking. We lack that a bit in blockchain. But this is a human crucial element of what makes blockchains so potentially special. Without getting into further detail, and it's a gross simplification, let me tell you that, you could do worse than remember this. And I'm going to build a few, or I'm going to extrapolate a few building blocks of what actually blockchains are. And from what this one you could say, well, it's got to do with immutability. Once the data is recorded, it is there. We've got it. It doesn't need to be validated again. It's 100% certain. And there's the element of incentivization, quite often in the shape of a value system. We all know this one, of course. That's what blockchain was made for. Anyone who has Bitcoin in here? Okay. All right. Male, slightly younger. Yeah. Problem. That's what it was made for. It's the simplest first application of blockchain technology, right? In the meantime, there's a bunch of other coins. If you're into climate change, there are coins for that. If you're into the dental industry, there are coins for that. If you're into education, there are becoming coins for that to incentivize online learning. If you're into privacy, there are coins for that that guarantee on a more stable level that your transaction is actually privately recorded and not publicly accessible. And this one exists as well. Anyone who owns this? No. But this industry understood quite quickly that there's a benefit in having things recorded in an immutable way. If you're intrigued, Google wife chargebacks, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. But the point is, we're not going to talk about sort of all this cryptocurrency thing, although we'll come back to it. The point is that the technology allows us to send these weird digital coins, these currencies, whatever you want to call it, between two parties without having to rely on a third party, without having to go through clearing houses, without having to go to central banks, etc., etc. Which, if you know, I bank with a smallish bank here in Belgium. Their whole system was down for a week last week due to some unexpected extra maintenance on an IT upgrade. That doesn't happen here, right? Because you can do this over the weekend and it arrives in the other people's accounts within seconds, minutes, hours, etc. Much quicker. So that's kind of the thing. So let's add a few building blocks to that. We got immutability, we got incentives, and an interesting one is that there is not just the blockchain. There are a bunch of blockchains. And the big distinction here is between open networks, which are permissionless, where people can just use in whatever capacity they want, for instance, Bitcoin, and there are permission blockchains. Call them the intranets of the internet, basically, where versions, open source, it's open source technology, so other companies have said, hey, we like that, but we're just going to make it a bit simpler for us to use, so we can have governance over it. Now, in this discussion about more transparency, more democracy, I don't think they're that exciting, although a lot of governments, if they are experimenting with blockchain, it's generally the permission side of things, where they have a lot of control who takes part of what. I'm not dissing it, I'm just trying to challenge a few thoughts out there. The third element, which is interesting as part of the blockchain, is programmability. The fact that you can't just do stuff with blockchains, you can actually program it. This guy was quite important for that, the sexiest of all computer programmers. But he invented basically a programming language for blockchain. And he said, hey, we can start adding business logic to it. If something sticks to, if something happens, then we can program that happens in an immutable kind of way. And the fourth element is the idea of that, what if this digital coin can represent anything? What if we're not transferring money as value, but anything? It's called tokenization. What if a digital coin represents something like land or ownership of a house? Then the whole system of land registry and notaries would go much quicker, faster, and cheaper. What if it represents something physical like gold? Or what if it presents a right? When you talk about voting and representative democracy, that could be an interesting element. When you transfer your vote and it's registered in an immutable kind of way and it can be traced back by anyone you give access to, it could help us something. So those are a bunch of issues, or a bunch of elements why I think that you could see blockchain as sort of a platform where you could build applications on that can do transaction of something valuable, maybe under some certain conditions. Now, why is that WPTF, wondrous and potentially totally fundamental? Let's just be nuanced about it. In its purest form, I sometimes describe blockchain as this. What they're good at is enabling parties, whether they're people or machines or whatever, entities, to exchange value, whatever that is, in an open and safe way, because of its immutability element, without them having to trust, because they don't want it for some reason, in a third party. Now that creates a whole different ball game. Let me quickly go through this. This is a sort of how value gets created in business, but it's the same quite often in the governments, how value gets created between different agencies, between different units. Lots of intermediaries, lots of parties in between. Not that they're not adding value, but they slow things down, they make things more expensive. This is how that gets done in blockchain land, for instance, in Brooklyn, where one side of the street, who has money or sun to buy solar panels, exchanges energy with the rest of the street. And they agree on pricing, and they agree on how this gets done through blockchain, through a blockchain application. And that's something different. I think I spoke at a knowledge talk about 5-6 years ago when I worked for the city of Antwerp, and I think I literally used this slide. I was really into the world of social media because I thought it was going to do to information what the printing press did. I thought it was going to democratized stuff. And to a certain extent it did, but it also created Facebook, and I'm sure Arol will later hack into that. It also created central powers of that information. And now what blockchain promises to do, and I'm not, if I sound slightly enthusiastic, it's because of the potential. I'm not a blind believer. Huh? But what it promises to do is that it builds on that network. It builds on that platform, and it promises to create an internet of value where people are free to exchange value, whatever they think that is. Anyone can tap into these permissionless blockchains. Anyone can start applications. Anyone can start interacting with it in some shape or form. And that's different, right? And there's 3 elements that I think could be building blocks for to put in your mind. First element is lots of coins, lots of digital currencies, whatever you want to call it. Some of these blockchains, the permissionless ones, allow you to create your own coin that you could give a function. That could be a commercial value, that could be a voting power or whatever. But it could create lots of little coins and niche coins. There are already 1,500 or something that are actually easily accessible. But what that creates, and this is about aligning incentives. And you guys were talking earlier about the mix between public and private sphere in this, is that this allows for new business models to be developed alongside the value of these coins. This is a project that kind of wants to do what Uber does. Namely, hey, I need a car to go somewhere. Hey, I've got a car. Shall we agree on a price and something? Like it used to be 50 years ago, bartering, ruilhandel in Dutch. It's kind of that, but they want to do what is actually a peer-to-peer transaction, more peer-to-peer. And they're using blockchain for that. Not just for the immutability of all the transactions, but also because they've created a value system around this thing. They always hate me for saying it, but they call it a taxi coin. Because everyone now goes, yeah, but then they're going to be the new Uber if they become successful. No, they won't, because they create the companies that do these things, they don't create software for profit, they create software for community. And they get rich through it, don't get me wrong, but because they own coins, they don't own shares. There are rarely any profit models in that. And that shifts the whole thing around from shareholder models, where the corporate structures are aimed towards money to the top, to stakeholder models, where everyone who's got skin in the game might be able to win something. So you're talking about network economies. Second element is that there's also tools to maybe, and I'm going to keep that short because I'm sure Arol will talk about that, about us managing our own identities and our own reputation. What if we can sort of make sure that we own our own data, and they're written in a blockchain which is 100% or 99.999% certain to be non-hackable, that we allow our own data to be used for whatever reasons we think. That's the second element of that. And the third element is that on these blockchains, because of its immutability and programmability and actually the element of tokenization, is that we are getting tools for governance, or self-governance if you want. Projects like Aragon, they're actually operating systems that allow us to structure groups of people together in whatever formats these groups of people agree on. That's like a country or a city. Those are like companies, etc., etc. And they are creating software in their early stages, I must add, to make sure that people can reorganize themselves again, or organize themselves in a new kind of way. They're even going as far as trying to set up digital jurisdiction in blockchain land. What would that mean? Because we're all people, we're going to have conflicts, of course. How can the immutability and the fact that whatever you do is recorded in some shape or form and adds to your reputation, how can that add to conflict resolution and basically a jurisdiction? So I had sort of 5 or 6 things where I thought, how can blockchain move us not away, not saying that that's better or worse by any means, but how can that move us away from, or give us an alternative to what we now have in a central world, but then in a decentral world? Because it's all about changing the functions and the value that the central organizations have. Banks are easy to understand. There's also governments. What is the core added value that we have governments add? What is the core added function that we've been given by the people over in the structures that we have over the decades? And it's this technology that's starting to nibble at that. It's not challenging it head on just yet, but it's nibbling at that. So these are a few things. So what, you know, you got one vote every year. What if you could have a 100% safe system that could give you voting rights, copying, and it adds to your reputation, or you are actually responsible for your votes? Instead of one stable or a bunch of stable, and I add stable, national coins that can be printed at will to pump money into the economy, you have a plethora of coins. There are actually smart economic guys that say that if you look at the economy as an ecosystem, one of the crucial elements to keep an ecosystem in balance is diversity. And that means that we need more coins, not less. This was one of the guys that started the euro, or that was an architect of the euro. He's changing tactic, and he's realizing that the more we have, the more market principles, and I know that's an ugly word, will work towards getting what's best for everybody. So those are theories that are being developed right now. What if you have data breaches? That's what we have now. But what if we can have sort of a self-management of our data? What questions does that raise? And what, instead of having one identity, which is on our ID card or our passport, we've got a unique identifier, but we can add stuff to that as we start living. We can add reputation to that. We can have lots of kind of persona that we are, because if you're a gamer, you're different than when you're on a dating site or at work, etc. And these kind of questions, they're becoming much more possible through this blockchain technology. And if you extrapolate that, I sometimes go, so nation states, what are we going to have? What if you are, okay, you're still living on soil, on grounds, on whatever, but what if this catches on and we all going to be whoever we are in a sort of fragmented world, which is online, but has effects on sort of our physical environment as well, because this is getting a bit more possible than it was 10 years ago. I think that's the last one, and that keeps me awake at night. What about funding? What about taxes? If we're all going to walk around with coins, with taxi coins and bread coins and whatever, and God knows what, and in the background there's machines doing all the exchanges, how are we going to make sure that the common good, which is what taxes were made for, kind of, how are they raised and how will we make them? And then we can do lots of things as governments. We can start taxing profits on Bitcoin. 33%, 1%, whatever, yeah, sure, should be done. But I think we as governments have a slightly bigger step to make, slightly bigger leap to make. Now, how can we, if we understand this technology a bit better and these tools are available, how can we reinvent the core purpose of taxation, of having funds available, and how are we going to spend them? Those are slightly more fundamental questions. And let me add something with Aral's favorite person. Sometimes, sorry Aral to keep referring to you, I'm raising the bar. Sometimes I think that this guy, who's in a lot of shit these days, I think he would get it. And I think that if he were to invent Facebook right now, he would not do what he did 5 or 10 years ago. He would not do an IPO. He would not raise money and create a shareholder system. He would create a Facebook coin, I think. Because I think he understands the power of network economies, or networks, and therefore network economies. And I think he would create a coin that would allow people to make sure that if you add value into a system, whatever that is, it could be a society, it could be an app, it could be a company, you get rewarded in return for that, and not just by having a free app. Yeah? And I think he would get that. Now, this may sound scientific, I don't know, we'll find out later. And I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but I think this is one of my favorite quotes from the futurist, I think he died recently, didn't he? He said, we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run. Hype, 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 hype. But we might well underestimate it in the long run. And with blockchain, I really have that feeling. I think it's so fundamental and so different to rewire a few things and redesign value flows and the way that we interact with each other, where we've put a lot of trust in central organizations, whatever they are, Ubers, governments, etc., banks, And I think some of these functions might potentially be redesigned by blockchain applications, whoever makes them. And I'm saying that because you see trends in the world where there is a decreasing trust in central organizations. Lots of countries, not just Eastern, Western Africa, whatever, lots of countries are now labeled as distruster, where their trust in central organizations, be them CEOs, media, governments, etc., is decreasing. And just right now, there's this technology that has the potential to do things slightly in a more decentral kind of way. Will the stars align? I'm not sure, but the call to action is, if you have the chance to look at things in a slightly more decentral way, teach yourself that and do it, because I think it might be beneficial for us. We should not let all technology people make these decisions. We need more people. We need more people on board from non-technical sides, sociology, policy makers, legal people, to see what it means if we end up going that way. We have a lot of questions to ask from any kind of field. I think it's going to be fun being a sociologist in the next 5 or 10 years, or a legal person for that matter, if you're open to thinking on a fundamental level. And that was me. Questions? Hello. Give anyone else a chance, really.
One thing that we didn't mention is that when Rebecca was verifying who owned the orange, she used as much energy as a house would use in 9 days to do that, for that one transaction. And in total, for this orange coin that you have, it would use as much energy as the country of Denmark in a year. Yep. Beyond that, we also didn't mention that if Rebecca and her friends got together, if she got half of her friends in that group together, that she could actually rewrite history. Yep. And change who owns the oranges. It's called a 51% attack. Yep. Some coins have had to fork because of this. Yep. Even with Bitcoin, there's the possibility that some of the miners will are voluntarily holding back from the 51%.
You're absolutely right. Bitcoin is not decentral in any kind of way. It's fairly central.
Well, exactly. And about 1,000 people today own about 40% of all Bitcoin. Yeah. So if we're talking about, you know, any sort of equality here, that's not really the tool for it. Really, my question, I guess, I'm not sure if I have to ask the question because I think you answered it. You said that if Mark Zuckerberg was to build Facebook today, he would use a blockchain. So my question was going to be, you know, do you really think that blockchain technologies have anything to do with human rights and democracy? But given that Mark Zuckerberg would still be Mark Zuckerberg, I guess you've already answered my question. Thank you.
Ecologically, I think you're absolutely right. Bitcoin blockchain, as the first application of blockchains, is not that great at doing what it does because it uses a lot of computer power to actually guarantee that safety. Huge design problem for that thing. What seems to be the case in that in the more developed blockchains, Ethereum, Neo, etc., that they're working towards other verification systems that require less energy, but more, they work more around that idea of aligned incentives, where you don't put energy to prove that you've done something, but you put money down to prove that you did something. So you run a risk of losing that. Absolutely point that this is the sort of the crux where people have to investigate, like, okay, what does it take to be decentral, and what can we not afford to use, like lots of electricity. Second point that you make about, the 51% attacks, yeah. Absolutely massive power. So if you guys decided, like, no, we're just going to make sure that the orange is now not from Annalisa, but we're going to make sure that we, as 51%, guarantee that one of us gets it, then you can technically do that. It would take a lot of power, computer power, but it's possible. The only thing is, and that's the idea of that sort of value system that you create, is that one of the reasons why it hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure it will happen at some point, is that the value of that value system will decrease really quickly because people are, there's something not right. And then people are not necessarily sitting on oranges, but on very small orange seeds that might be worthless. That's the idea of crypto economics behind it, that they're trying to see how can we balance safety, computer power, and human behavior, greed, effectively, to still design something that's better for the network as such. About democracy and human rights, I think a system, say Facebook, where you connect all the dots together, or where as people you start interacting with each other, if there would be a platform, many have tried with old technology, web technology didn't really work, but if you have a system where there is a coin, a value system of some kind, you know, a lot of people believe, and I tend to go with them, that you might have a different way of exchanging value, and therefore you have a lot more potential to be rewarded for whatever added value you have. Yeah? What do you say, Bart? Coffee? Oh, I'm hanging around later on as well, so if you want to share some thoughts or questions, then you're more than welcome.
We'll leave it up to the public. It's a democracy.
Yeah.
Time for one more. Time for one more question or coffee? Okay, coffee. Nicolaus.
Thank you very much.
He's keeping you away from the coffee.
He selected the wrong person, clearly. Because throughout the presentation, I think there was a nice trapdoor. I mean, all the technical oversimplifications were exactly the points that are critical or debated. I mean, electricity, 51%, call it, I mean, these problems mentioned already, but I would say the most critical problem of all, the weakness of the system, its weakest link, which is the final human user. So, I mean, just some examples. I don't care if Bitcoin is secure. If I lose my password, it's the same thing. I mean, it happens with my email, my life is ruined. Who cares how secure Bitcoin is at the technological end of the story? And the danger about Ethereum, and it's not that it created a new Bitcoin, but it wants to impose an artificial intelligence networks. The problem about, for example, smart contracts is not if the contracts will be efficient, but that exactly they will be efficient. The typical car accident out in the street is not negotiated through the insurance company, but driver to driver. Most of the cases don't even reach the insurance company. I mean, it's most probably a flexible person-to-person negotiation out of the contract. An automatic contract dehumanizes everything we know so far. These are important points, and they cannot be considered just technical little details that we can oversimplify and advertise any technology. That's my point of view. And some things, last remark, I like the discussion about one coin, many coins. Well, of course, I would like, I mean, we're not, I mean, I don't think there is anything over 100 years old here in the room. Otherwise, maybe they would remember why we moved from the 10, 20 different currencies of the Ottoman or Austro-Hungarian empires to one central coins. Maybe they had some problems at the time and they decided, oh, let's simplify the banking system. And also, if Mark Zuckerberg was 100 years ago, maybe he would use pigeons, so not blockchain. I bet he would still paint them blue and put an ad on their leg, because that's his business model in the end. It's not how messages are carried, but that he adds a profit-making tag on them.
Yeah, I think I would disagree with the last one, because there are other ways of value exchange. I think you're absolutely right about the human aspect of it, and I think that's what the call to action is also about, like that we need to challenge that technology at face value, because a lot of it is about interhuman relations, and a lot of it, they sometimes call the system trustless. It's a trustless technology. I think that's the biggest misconception ever, because it's actually more fundamental. It's about asking people to trust a system that's trustless, and that's exactly about how people interact. And what if it were to work and you are able to take some kind of elements of trust out of a group of people? What does that do with those people? And what about, you're referring to even the simple if this then that thing. There's a lot of cases that we can't if this and thenify. Absolutely agree with that. But there's a lot of potential in there that I think, you know, we are going to be able to maybe quantify some interhuman relationships, etc. There's a lot of people looking at the link between artificial intelligence and blockchain and how that can work for the benefit of it. But what was your last? There was another point. I can't remember now. Sorry.
About the currencies or Mark Zuckerberg?
Oh yeah, the currencies there, where one of the reasons why centralized currencies existed or were making is to make things simpler. Is because it added complexity to trade in lots of different currencies. What's happening is that behind the back there's lots of sort of exchanges happening, even in a decentral kind of way, that they're attempting to make these all these 1,500 to 2,000 to 3,000 currencies interconnected all the time. And they could refer to a euro or a Bitcoin or a dollar or whatever as some kind of referral coin. So these things are being looked at, you know. And we're having a bit more than 40 minutes now. But that's sort of, you're touching on absolutely a couple of pain points. And I'm not going to disagree with them at all, especially the interhuman element. And I think the effect it can have on groups of people working together, is that going to be beneficial for them? Is that going to be beneficial for all parties involved? Those are questions that need to be researched, challenged, and built in prototypes by various kind of companies. So, thank you for your input.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. For the next part, we're going to talk about how it's important to talk about smart citizens, not smart cities. I hope you enjoy it.
My name is Christopher Wiley. I'm a data scientist, and I helped set up Cambridge Analytica. It is a full-service propaganda machine. If you want to change politics, you first have to change culture, because politics flows from culture. If you want to change culture, you have to first understand what the units of culture are. People are the units of culture. So if you want to change politics, you first have to change people to change the culture. We spent $1 million harvesting tens of millions of Facebook profiles, and those profiles were used as the basis of the algorithms that became the foundation of Cambridge Analytica itself. The company itself was founded on using Facebook data. It was almost everything that would be on a Facebook profile. So that was things like status updates, likes, in some cases private messages.
And people had no idea that their data was being taken in this way?
No.
So you've harvested my data, and then you've used that to target me in ways that I can't see and that I don't understand?
Yeah, so we would know what kinds of messaging you would be susceptible to, including the framing of it, the topics, the contents, the tone, whether it's scary or not, that kind of thing. So what you would be susceptible to, and where you're going to consume that. And then how many times do we need to touch you with that in order to change how you think about something? We wouldn't just be targeting you as a voter, we'd be targeting you as a personality. You are whispering into the ear of each and every voter, and you may be whispering one thing to this voter and another thing to another voter. You are playing with an entire country, the psychology of an entire country, without their consent or awareness. If you want to fundamentally change society, you first have to break it. Whatever it is that we think this target profile will be receptive to, we will create content on the internet for them to find. And then they see that and they click it and they go down the rabbit hole until they start to think that, until they start to think something differently. Yeah.
So you didn't ever stop and think, actually, this is people's personal information and we're taking it and we're using it in ways that they don't understand. You didn't think, actually, I'm not sure about this.
The company, we didn't do a good job at due diligence, so no, we didn't.
But what about you? Not just the company, your involvement in that?
No, I mean, we were solely focused on getting this data and doing this experiment.
So, who do you trust?
This is such a hard question to answer. Who do I trust?
Why is that such a hard question to answer? What does it say about the kind of world that we've built that that is a hard question to answer? So that's Christopher Wiley, and according to the explosive article by Carol Cadwalder recently in The Guardian, he, aged 24, came up with a plan to harvest the Facebook profiles of millions of people and to use their private and personal information to create sophisticated psychological and political profiles. So when I first read this, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. I know of someone who was younger and who came up with a plan to harvest the Facebook profiles of not millions, but billions of people, and to use their private and personal information to create sophisticated psychological and political profiles. Let's give him some credit, right? That person was Mark Zuckerberg. He came up with the idea first, right? And Mark will be the first one to tell you that privacy is dead and we shouldn't worry about it. But just remember that he's talking about your privacy, not his. Because when Mark buys a house, he buys the 4 houses around his house because his privacy is alive and well, thank you very much. When Mark uses a computer, he tapes up the microphone and he tapes up the camera because his privacy is valuable and he knows how to protect it. But yet the same Mark has 60 people right now working at Facebook to literally read your mind. The same Mark wants to put devices in every home with cameras and microphones that watch and hear everything that you do, and his company has a patent on using that information to understand your emotional state so that it can be manipulated and exploited. Now, it's true that although we're ahead in some ways in the West, sometimes we're not the leaders. China, for example, has already started using people's social media to award them a credit score which determines what they can and cannot do, what loans they can get, etc., based on how well they fit with the Chinese government's ideology, of course. But don't worry, because Mark has a patent for doing exactly the same thing, so we will hopefully one day soon catch up. Now, why does Mark do this? Well, quite plainly, because this is the business model of Mark's company, Facebook. This is how it works. Facebook has 2 audiences. Facebook has their users, which are the people who use their services, and their customers, which are the people who actually pay them for the services. And the way the business model works is Facebook watches and tracks everything that their users are doing and stores them indefinitely. We call this data, right? And then continuously analyzes with their algorithms all of this information to create the intimate insights about these people that we know as profiles. And it is these profiles that are then monetized with their customers. They're given little glimpses into them. You might hear that Facebook sells its data. No. It's too valuable to sell. They might give limited access to certain parties. And this isn't a bug, as we would call it in the technology industry. This is not a mistake, although Mark has apologized many times for many mistakes. This is the core business model. It starts when Facebook is a startup. And Mark needs money. Where does he get the money from? Well, he has to find a venture capitalist. This is one of the core players in this system. And he has to tell the venture capitalist from day 0, hey, my business model, this business model of farming people farming as I call it, the one that you invest in as a venture capitalist, that's my business and I'm good at it. And if we're successful in a few years' time, we're going to have 200, 300 million people using our platform. How much money will you give me today for when we sell those people in 5 or 6 years' time if I'm successful? In other words, how much will you invest in my exit, the sale of my company? Venture capitalists do not exist in businesses themselves or in sustainable businesses. They invest in the sale, the exit of a business. That's when they get their money back and they make their return on their investment. So the venture capitalist in this case said, Mark, you look like a clever young man. I'm going to give you $5 million. Now, I've already also given 9 other startups, as we call them in Silicon Valley, $5 million. And I know that I'm going to lose 9 of those, right? So I need you to be a $1 billion unicorn. This is the system. This is what a startup is. A startup is not just any new business. It's a Silicon Valley brand. It's very important that we understand that. And this system itself is what Shoshana Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. It is the interplay between surveillance, which is about the accumulation of information, and capitalism, which is about the accumulation of wealth. What happens when you have a feedback loop between these two things? Well, we end up where we are right now. But we weren't always here. This is not the first age of computing. The first age of computing was a similar place to where we are, but much lesser in scope. We started out with mainframe computers, which were centralized. They were owned by universities and large corporations, but they were limited in scope to that corporation or to that university. And you had to rent time on these machines because they were somebody else's machines. You did not own them. And of course, you had no expectation of privacy. You had no expectation of any rights. The owners had all of those rights. And then something very unique happened in the history of computing so far. We got personal computers, which were decentralized. Now, these were machines that you owned and controlled. So you had every expectation of privacy. You had every expectation that your rights would be met. In case they weren't, so if I put a floppy disk into my old IBM XT computer and it started watching what I was doing and started telling some computer somewhere else about it, back then we called it spyware. We called it malware. We knew that it was something undesirable. Today we would call it the business model of the potentially next billion-dollar unicorn startup, right? So what happened? Well, we kind of went back to the future with the World Wide Web. We assumed that the web was decentralized, but it's actually centralized. Its architecture is a centralized architecture. It has a server and a client. The servers are the computers you don't see that are in the cloud somewhere. The clients are your web browsers that you access them with. And what kind of dynamic does that create? Well, many clients start connecting to fewer and fewer servers, especially if you take this client-server architecture and you put it into an enzymatic vat, a pool of capitalism and venture capital that incentivizes these centers, these servers, to scale as rapidly as possible. We call them accelerators, right? Scale as rapidly as possible, vertically, as high as you can go so that we can sell you and make our billions. Then what do you get? Well, you get our new mainframes. Our new mainframes in this era of the web, which is the mainframe 2.0 era, are the Googles and the Facebooks. The difference is that these computers are no longer limited to just the corporation or the university. They're global in scope and they affect all of our lives. Now, what interests me the most is where we're going next, which I see as the equivalent of the personal computing era. We're not going to go back in time, we have to go forward. But what does a personal web look like? Because today, all of our smart technology, smart televisions, smart watches, smart cars that we drive or will drive us to places, smart teddy bears, smart pills that we ingest, they all work the same way, by gathering data about us. This is not the problem. This is a fact of life. This is how modern technology works. We're not going to change this. But the real question is who owns and controls this data, the technologies, and the intimate insights that are being derived by them. If we can say that we do as individuals, there is no problem here. That's a system that is compatible with individual sovereignty, with a healthy commons, with a democracy. If the answer, however, is that a handful of corporations own and control this data, the technologies, and the insights, and that by extension all of this information is made available to government agencies as well, then we're talking about a very different type of social system that we're living in. We're talking about a corporatocracy. And this is not a democracy. This is a feudal system that we're talking about. And don't worry, because we don't have to make this decision right now. We made it a few decades ago. Today, all of our data and technologies are owned and controlled by a handful of corporations. And today, we're not sleepwalking into anything. We live in a corporatocracy. The real question is, where are we going to go from here? Because the world we live in today is one in which one company, Google, can track you across 70 to 80% of the web. The 70% statistic is from Princeton, the 80% from my own web crawls, because I make an app, a free and open source tool called Better, that is a tracker blocker. We block them. We say, don't track people. We don't ask. We stop them from doing it. But we have to find the trackers and catalog them. And does Google have a lot of trackers on the web? My gosh, do they have a lot of trackers on the web. They can track you across 80% of the web. Now, of course, it's not even Google anymore, is it? Because Google got so big that it became the whole alphabet, right? And we're talking about Alphabet Incorporated. Don't forget when you're using these cute names, Google, Facebook, that there's an incorporated at the end of it, and it's a corporation, right? Google doesn't just track you across the web. When you do searches, they track you, of course, but how many people have an Android phone in here? That's a tracking device, right? The moment you sign into Google Play, I'm pretty sure you don't have Android open source project running on your devices. What about Gmail? Who uses Gmail in this room, right? Oh, wow, that's more than half the room. That's amazing and disconcerting. So when you use Gmail, of course, Google reads all of your email. You know that, right? And you might say, Aral, that's okay. This is a selfish decision that I've made, that I'm okay with the fact that Google can read my email and I get this very useful service from it. Well, I would say you're wrong. It's not just a decision that affects you. Because Google doesn't just read your email. Google reads the email that everyone else sends to you as well. Your friends, your family, your loved ones, your acquaintances, your business partners. And you've made the decision for them as well that it's okay for Google to violate their privacy as well. So in a way, I guess it is a selfish decision, but not in the way that you might think. It's much more like secondhand smoke, right? It doesn't just affect you. The cigarette affects the people around you as well. Google Drive, they know whatever documents you're putting in there, they're looking through them, they're reading them, etc., 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 right? Google Maps, they know where you are. Not only that, Google can track you all the way to a retail store where you use your credit card and add that to all of the information that they have. So how surprised was I when I found out, for example, the city of Amsterdam was giving all of their license plate information in real time to Google, because Google came to them and said, hey, here's a free application for you. We'll tell your people, your citizens, if there's free car park spots. And I only realized this because I was being interviewed for a documentary, and the documentarians told me, and I was like, that's bullshit. And that's the comment that went into the final documentary right after the CTO of Amsterdam was saying, there's nothing wrong with this. It's so lovely. We're so happy that Google is working with us. He doesn't like me too much anymore. But we're walking around in cities and we're being tracked. If you have a phone in your pocket, the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are being tracked. The best regulation we have right now that's being proposed says if you don't like it, turn off your phone. Unacceptable. Where if you're at a pizza parlor in Oslo and you're looking at the menu is looking back at you. We only know because it crashed and somebody took a photograph and we could see what they were looking for. Are you male? Are you female? The camera in the menu is looking at you, right? Wow. Okay, so we're talking about smart cities. Smart. This is a very interesting term. We use it for smartphones, smart watches, smart cars. Have you stopped to ask yourselves who's getting smarter about whom? Is it a handful of corporations that are getting smarter about all of us, or us getting smarter about ourselves? Because if it's the former, and if this is the philosophy we're buying into, we're not building cities anymore, we're building panopticons. And a panopticon is a very special type of prison. It's one where you can just put one guard in the middle, because the prisoners cannot see if there's a guard or not. And the guard can't see all the prisoners, but it doesn't have to, right? Because the prisoners behave themselves, because they don't know when they're being watched and when they're not. The chilling effects of mass surveillance, whether corporate or government. Look, there's a very easy way that we can fix this problem. It doesn't require deep philosophy, it requires kindergarten philosophy, right? Never accept candy from strangers. If there's one thing you want to take away from today, let me spell it out for you. Never accept candy from Silicon Valley, right? You would think that this is a simple request or a simple thing to do, but the government of Italy is in a process to sell all of their health records for their full population to IBM. Now, I can only assume that the people in the government of Italy have never read a historic textbook. Because if they did and they looked at what happened with IBM in World War II, why the precursor to Watson, Watson is the AI, right? You know who Watson was named after? Their first CEO. And do you know who he got a medal for during World War II? Who he got a medal from? For services rendered to the state? You might have heard of a gentleman called Adolf Hitler, right? Read the book, IBM and the Holocaust. Very interesting read. But apparently no one in Italy read it. And all of this information about us is being shared with governments. If you want one photograph to summarize surveillance capitalism, it's this one. I can't think of a better one. These are the leaders of the top technology companies in the world who among themselves have more intimate insight about the lives of more people than any other group throughout history has ever had, sitting in the same room as then President-elect Donald Trump. I mean, if this doesn't scare the shit out of you, I don't know what will. Quite frankly, it does for me. Surveillance capitalists are not your friends. Google, Facebook, all of the startups within this ecosystem that are venture capital funded and have the same business models, that are just thirsting to be bought by these companies, and they buy them about 7 or 8 a week, if you look at Google. They're not your friends. We have to start seeing them as what they are, threats. Adversaries and threats to human rights and to democracy. You know, we talk about public-private partnerships, right? We talked about it earlier in the session. Ask yourselves, who are your partners, right? Because in the past, look at big tobacco. In the past, big tobacco was good for your health, right? They had some great partners. They had doctors and they had dentists, and they were telling people, this is the brand of cigarette that I smoke. Oh, great. Okay. So are you the doctors in the cigarette ads of today? Do you want to be? Stop legitimizing them if you don't. And remember, now that Cambridge Analytica is out and the lens is on Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, which is the same company, basically, the business model as Google, etc. They're going to make some changes now, superficial ones. They're going to add filters to their cigarettes, right? And they're going to tell you it's now safe to smoke. Watch out for that. What does a filter on a cigarette look like in our age? It looks like the Center for Humane Technology, which was founded recently by people who are ex-Google and venture capitalists, right? No, you know, just learn to recognize the filtered cigarettes, right? And say no to these things. There's a great article by Librarian Shipwreck where they say, one cannot but marvel at an organization which provides the antidote as it distills the poison, right? Venture capital in Silicon Valley gave us surveillance capitalism. They today benefit hugely from it and make billions and billions of dollars of profit. They're not going to provide the antidote, right? Or as someone on Twitter said, elites can rapidly occupy physical and verbal spaces of social change to ensure it does not occur, with the Center for Humane Technology as an example. Another example, which you might not be aware of, Mozilla. My gosh, Aral, what are you doing? All of our heroes, one after another. Mozilla. What's wrong with Mozilla? Well, they get all of their funding from surveillance capitalism, more than $1 billion worth of funding from Google. In fact, they've been so successful, I wouldn't be surprised if the next offshoot of Mozilla Corporation was Healthzilla, fully funded by Big Tobacco. Or maybe we can have Greenzilla that gets billions from ExxonMobil. Would you trust any of those? Why no questions? When you have an entity that is fully funded by surveillance capitalism, fully funded by the erosion of your privacies, that tells you we're working hard to protect your privacy. Why no questions? I know what you're thinking, you know, oh my goodness, how did this happen, right? Let's make sure we don't fall for these things. Who knows about Singularity University? Singularity, high-tech concept, Ray Kurzweil, how cool is that, right? Yeah? They're in Denmark now, so Europe can be cool too. They're bringing cool to Europe, right? They're not a university, for one thing. Let's stop calling them a university, right? I mean, I don't know if we have any advertising standards in Europe, probably, but false advertising, they're not a university. They're just literally not a university. What are they? They are a public relations and lobbying firm, right, for Silicon Valley here in Europe. and set up by Googlers, etc. So let's learn to recognize these, because they have the ear of the Danish Prime Minister, for example. And also, for goodness sake, watch out for blockchain oil salesmen. Because they're everywhere. They are everywhere. Blockchain, as we heard earlier, does have one purpose. It decentralizes trust with a database that decentralizes trust. That's the only thing it does. It is not topologically decentralized. What do I mean by that? If you have 1 million people in a system, the data, different data, is not in 1 million places. The same data is in 1 million places. In fact, that's the whole idea. We can guarantee it's the same data, right? But it's not topologically decentralized, and that's what we need as a core for a decentralized society. So watch out for blockchain oil salesmen. It's a very, very lucrative business, right? Because I've heard it described recently on Twitter. Let me see if I can remember this, because it was amazing. Blockchain is a tool that turns libertarian masturbation fantasies into climate change. That was the quote on Twitter. I need not say no more. At the very least, though, folks, come on. At the very least, let's not take democratically elected governments, democratic countries, right, and then have ambassadors created for Silicon Valley from them, like Denmark just did, right? Nothing says democracy is dead like having a democratically elected government have an ambassador elected for Silicon Valley. That's saying to corporations that should be regulated by governments, that governments have a democratic mandate to regulate, we're just going to roll over for a belly rub right now? Would you rub our bellies? And that is the death of democracy. Seriously. You know, Denmark should not be proud about this. This is not modern or anything. We can do better than to import surveillance capitalism into Europe. And that means not having these people as partners, as seeing them as adversaries and protecting our citizens from their toxic business model and not legitimizing them. To do that, though, we have to agree on some fundamentals about how we can move forward. Like data. We keep talking about data. Data is just information. What we don't talk about is information about what? Is it information about rocks? Data about the commons, about the world around us? Or is it information about people? It's very important that whenever we use the word data, we qualify it. Because I cannot deprive a rock of its freedom. I cannot deprive a rock of its life. I cannot emotionally or physically hurt a rock. I can do all of those things to people. So it's very important when we're deciding on policies of data protection. What are we protecting? Are we protecting rocks? Or are we protecting people? When we're talking about ownership, who should have ownership of data? I have no idea. Do you mean ownership of data about the commons? Then it should be the commons. Are you talking about ownership of data of individuals? Then it should be individuals. If we cannot make this core distinction, if this is not our goal for the future, let's just stop here, because that's the fundament. Because we're really talking about people. What is data about people? Well, let's take a simpler example. Let's say I have a little statue. If I have enough data about this little statuette, I can take a 3D printer, and I can create an almost exact replica of this little statuette. Now, I want you to think about what I can do if I have enough data about you. And let me tell you, I don't want to 3D print you. And I don't care about your body, because I can own you without owning your body. The business model of owning everything else about you that makes you who you are apart from your body is the business model of Silicon Valley. The first version of this required bodies. We called it slavery. We need a new name for version 2.0. I don't know what it is. Because this is you, and this is how we draw the boundaries of you. This is very important. Because over many years, we've built a system of laws and justice that knows how to protect these boundaries. We're still not really great at it, but we know what the rules are, right? That I cannot abuse these boundaries, and if I do, I will be punished for it. Well, what happens when your cell phone comes into the picture, your mobile phone? What is our relationship here? Are we having a conversation with this device, this new technological device? When I have an idea, am I saying, hey, phone, hey, Siri, right? Would you write this down for me? Okay, yeah, sure, I will. If this is the relationship we have, then okay, what is surveillance? Surveillance is what it's always been. Signals capture between two actors, right? It's what the Stasi used to do. But what if modern technology changes things? What if, when I have an idea and I don't want to keep it just in my head, what I'm doing is I'm extending my mind and thereby extending myself using this piece of technology? If this is how we constitutionally see our relationship to technology, then it would make perfect sense to expand our boundaries of the self as we understand them to include the technologies by which we extend our biological capabilities. And then what does surveillance become? Surveillance becomes an abuse of the self. And we already have a system of laws and justice that knows how to deal with abuses of the self. We don't need a new Magna Carta of digital rights or a Bill of Digital Rights. Those are usually suggested by people who want those rights to be lesser than the ones that we have in the human rights law that already exists. We just need to apply that law that already exists to our new understanding of what constitutes the person in a digital age. Because this is about personhood. And to protect personhood, we must fund and build ethical technologies. These are ethically designed technologies. Ethical design is not complex. People will always tell you that technology is complex, right? A lot of people will say technology is complex. At its core, the social issues are not. If someone's telling you it's too complex for you to understand, they probably have a vested interest in it appearing to be too complex. So let me tell you, ethical design, very, very simple. Relies on a core fundamental concept, respect. Respect primarily for human rights, and then respect for human effort, and then respect for human experience. And if we follow this while we're designing our organizations and designing our products, well, that's when we have ethical design. Simple, right? All of our technology nearly today, the mainstream, the Silicon Valley model, relies on abuse of human rights at its very core. They do care about human effort. They do care about human experience. Why? Because if they just gave you that rotten core, you would not eat it. At that point, we're not talking about design. We're talking about masking the acrid taste of an unethical core that would be otherwise rejected by covering it with tasty flesh and a beautiful facade. That is not design, that is decoration. So if you want to learn more about ethical design, please go online, look at indie/ethical design, and you'll see the Ethical Design Manifesto. There's a book by a friend of mine called Trina Falbe that I had the honor of writing the foreword for, and she wrote an article on Smashing Magazine about it as well, so you can go to Smashing Magazine and find that. But it's very important. Ethical design is not about the design of ethical products. It has to start with the design of an ethical organization. We need ethically designed organizations to build the products. So, for example, take Indie, our two-person not-for-profit that we have. We don't have venture capital. If I take venture capital, don't trust another word I say, because I have lost control over my organization. I've already sold it. It might take 5 years. Everything we do is free and open source. So even if we go evil tomorrow, anyone else can take what we've done and change it and develop it in a different direction. Design of the organization is where it starts. And what kind of different products then are we trying to create? What are we trying to do? The opposite of Silicon Valley? Well, we're trying to create an internet in which individuals retain control over their data and how they benefit from it. We're trying to create a future where every citizen owns and controls their place on the internet. We're trying to create the kind of future where it will work like Facebook, but each person will own their site. There's no central authority hoovering up your data. So imagine if we had Facebook without the Facebook. Because Facebook doesn't connect you to each other like they say on their site. Again, is there like an advertising standards thing in Europe? Because we should talk to them. They connect everyone to Facebook, right? So imagine if every one of us had their own place on the internet. that we owned and controlled, and it was this place that all of our smart devices connected to. And that this was a place that wasn't owned or hosted by any one organization because it's interoperable. It could be hosted by lots of different organizations. And no one could lock you in because it was free and open source and anyone could take it and improve it as well. Well, that is our vision for an IndieNet, as we're calling it right now. An internet of people. And it starts with your place on the web, on the internet. And that's what we're calling an Indie site. It is what I would call a federated personal website. Now, these don't really exist right now, so that's just what I've called it. If you can think of a better name, let's use it. But what it is a personal website with one difference. There's a little follow button. And anyone with their own personal website can follow anyone else and talk to them. And to do that, they enter the address of their own site, which we can make even easier going forward. But it's not just indie sites that can follow each other. Maybe you've heard of Mastodon. It's federated, decentralized Twitter. Anyone can run their own Twitter today. This exists right now, right? There are 1,600 people running their own Twitters, not Twitter accounts. Twitter.com's Mastodon, right? I have my own. I'm the only one on it. There's the first one that has about 100,000 people or so on it. We can all talk to each other, though. We're not locked to one Twitter. So we can also talk with them. And in fact, we can talk to anyone who implements a W3C standard activity pub for federation. So there we are. We have our indie sites. They're talking to each other. They're following each other. We've kind of built Facebook without the Facebook. That's great. And I have my personal site, let's say at aral.ghent. But how do we get started? How do I start? That's the challenge. That's actually the biggest challenge. Because what we're competing with is this 30-second sign-up form on Facebook, where Facebook says in 30 seconds, I will rent you your identity. I will rent you a place where you can talk to people. I get to listen, right? How do we compete with this? How do we give you your federated personal website running on your domain that you own and control in less than 1 minute? I think this is one of the greatest design challenges of our era, to be perfectly honest. If we cannot solve this, we cannot fix this issue. No blockchain ain't gonna fix it, all right? Because right now, this is the process. You go to a domain registrar, you pick out your name, you go to a web host of some sort, you get a server from them. You have a lot of technical knowledge to be doing these things. You configure one to point to the other. You install the software, in this case, Indie site. This takes, let's say, 5 hours. To install Mastodon would take someone with good technical knowledge 5 hours. You know, no one's going to do that apart from maybe 3 people, or in the case of Mastodon, 1,600 did in a world of 7 billion or 9 billion. How many billion are we now? No, this is not going to work. So this is what brought me to Ghent. In fact, the person that brought me to Ghent was Martine. She sent me an email in May of last year, and it had a very interesting term. We're working on a city of people. Now, I kind of zoned in on that because I'm talking about building an internet of people. And then she sent me some more information about Ghent to sweeten it, and she was like, she sent me a story where apparently the castle that's in Ghent with these fortifications around it, those defenses were not built against outside invaders. They were built to protect the people in the castle from the people in Ghent. So I was like, I like these people. These are the kind of people I can work with. And it was very clear they did not want to be a Silicon Valley smart city, that they wanted smart citizens. And when I started doing my research a few days before my keynote at their first Foresight conference for the future of the city, I also saw that they have their own top-level domain. So control over their own top-level domain. So I was like, all right, here's an opportunity. So at my talk at the Foresight conference, I began by saying, this is not a keynote. This is a proposal. It's a proposal for the city. And I want you to tell me, because Carl Philippe was there, head of strategy, I was like, I want you to tell me what you think about this at the end of my talk. And that's him. And so I got off the stage, and I went to Carl Philippe almost immediately afterwards, after telling him about my vision for this. And I said, so are we doing it? And he said, yeah, let's do it. So about a month later, I happened to do an interview with the media here where I said, hey, this is what we're doing, which was kind of fun. And I think Carl Philippe got called into the mayor's office. He's like, what are we doing? And he was like, oh yeah, about that. This is what we're doing. And the mayor said, okay, do it. Let's do it. Let's do this. Let's try it, right? Because that's the thing. Nobody else is trying this. We, my little team over here that I'll introduce you in a second, we and anyone else who's working on this, on legitimate answers to this question, we're a statistical rounding error. When you look at all of the investment that goes into Silicon Valley, all of the teams that are working on building surveillance technology, we actually don't exist. It's amazing. It's a conundrum. I'm here talking to you, but we don't exist. So we need more funding. And we need funding, actually. So we started working with the city of Ghent. And there's my team. There's Foike and Bart. And Bart and Foike are back there. Say hi. Wave your hands. They love the attention, by the way. Yeah. They're just really good at acting like they don't. And we started out with Wim, who's not part of our team anymore, but he helped us a lot as well. And we started building hello.ghent. So imagine, this is one way of doing it, imagine that everyone in Ghent got a letter through the post box, and it said, hey, go to this address and put in this code, and you can have your own place on the internet. Really? Well, how does that look like? Well, I just recorded this before coming to Ghent. This is the latest version that we have. There's a little robot. It says, hey, did you get the code I emailed you? Yes, I did. Here it is. And then we go, okay, well, what's the domain name you want? The code is what gives them the right to have the domain name, which we're supporting, which we're subsidizing. Okay, I've ordered a domain for you. Are you ready to set up your site? And if you say ready, you go to settings, you've already started to customize the site. It's still on hello.ghent, but you're setting up your personal website already, right? At the hello.ghent domain. And so I choose a profile image. I'm going to choose a background image that Laura, my partner at Indie, took, which is lovely. And then I'm saving that. And so I've this is maybe taken 20, 30 seconds, right? And then when I go back, I go upstairs to the site, and it says, okay, it's ready. And I switch to my Indie site at my own domain, and I can, for example, start typing a public post. And I can have that public post shared with the world. Or I can also start following other people, and I can start talking to them as well. Now, all of this is, of course, free and open source. So anyone can take it and build upon it and improve it or change it. We're also doing all of our development openly. So if you go to the source code repository, you can see all the conversations we're having. You can see all of the discussions we're having where we don't agree on things, etc. It's all open there. And if you go to indienet.info, you can see all of our documentation as we have it right now. This has only been going for about 3 months now. So it's very, very early stages, but we're already making a lot of progress. That's indienet.info. So we have hello.ghent. We have what we're calling the magic website factory, which is the bit that does the domain registration and the setting up of the servers, the hard part. And then we have Indie Site, which is the thing that we're actually installing and giving to people to have their own place on the internet. And if you think about like where we are, hello.ghent is about 90% done. Indie Site is about 50% to alpha. And the middle bit, we are just about to start that by embedding our team, hopefully, with the company that currently is the patron of the top-level domain. But as far as anyone else is concerned, they go to one website and suddenly they're able to customize it and they end up with their own site. The bit that I didn't show you because it's not ready is you also, at the very beginning, create a strong password. And this strong password is not something that Ghent knows or anyone else knows but you. From this, we create cryptographically secure keys using the best technology available right now, and which is the open algorithms, the ED 25519, is it, algorithm. So we create secure keys, private keys, that are private to you, that nobody else has access to, not even us, right? If you forget your password, you're kind of screwed right now, but we're looking at things for that as well. But with this, you can communicate with end-to-end encryption with other people that have Indie sites as well. So you can communicate privately with each other, with people within Ghent, anyone else who installs this, and you can also communicate privately with the city. Now we do this, then we can go back to where we are today, this corporatocracy that we live in which all of our data and technology are owned and controlled by corporations, and we can chart a progressive path forward where, to a future where when we ask who owns and controls the data, the technology, and the intimate insight, we can answer we do as individuals, and that we live in a democracy and we live with human rights. Now this is the future that I want to live in. This is the future that I'm working for. This is the future that I believe we deserve. And this is the future that I challenge us to build. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do I have time for questions? I overran a little bit, I think. There was a question at the front. Sorry, I didn't take that. I was kind of in my flow. Oh, please, please. And that is an important question.
Yeah, you or somebody else is running the servers.
Yeah.
So how can I trust you that you are not looking into those servers?
Right.
I mean, Microsoft said that too.
Right. So that's a great question, and a question you should be asking of everyone that tells you that they're working on something similar. So how can you trust that the people hosting it, which is not going to be us necessarily, hopefully there'll be hundreds of them, but those hosts are not looking at what you're posting? Well, in general terms, you cannot, because if you're posting public things, then those are unencrypted, and anyone, including the people hosting them, can look at that. But if you're posting private messages, if you're having a private conversation with a person or a private group and you're having a conversation there, then it is mathematically impossible for them to look into the messages because they are end-to-end encrypted. So you don't have to trust us. And that should be your criteria on whether or not to trust a certain technology. The question you should ask is, do I have to trust it? If you have to trust a corporation or a group of people, then they don't deserve your trust because they haven't designed it in a way where they don't require your trust. Does that make sense? Okay. Another question? We have one back there from the gentleman. Yeah?
Thank you.
Thank you.
If we want to make this really work, I mean, essentially we need to substitute everything that is offered to us, let's say for free by the Gmails and the Facebook and the Apples of this world. So we need at some point to have a website, an email, a chat, a Twitter, and everything equivalent. And especially as, of course, we have all these exponential increase in data, combinations, new applications, new way to, it means an exponential increase in services. And if you want this to make work, it means you have to catch up. So each time someone develops a new service, a new way to communicate, you have to provide it also the equivalent, no? I mean, otherwise you always are in a gap with the candy that the stranger offers in the park.
Right. Okay. Thank you for your question. No, I don't agree that every time someone from Silicon Valley comes up with a new service, we have to offer an equivalent. I think that'd be a very silly thing to do. The next time somebody sets up a company with $5 million in venture capital to create a social network where you can only say yo, for example, is not something that we should be replicating. But more than that, if we're practicing design, if we're not just copying, if we're practicing design, then we come from a very different place. Silicon Valley creates its products in a way where, well, I guess to put it differently, when Facebook and Google improve their products, that's kind of like the massages we give to Kobe beef. It's not for the benefit of the cow. So these products, the bits that you think are useful to you, right, are the lure. They're what get you addicted so that the actual machine can farm you. Right? So we're not starting from there. A lot of decisions have to be made there. It's very hard. When Google builds something like Gmail and it works so good, they've done twice the amount of work that we have to do. Because they built both a machine that lets you read your email and keep in touch with people, and they've also built a machine at the same time that farms you while you're doing that without you knowing that you're doing that, without you being aware of it. They might tell you that they're doing it, but without you being aware of it. So just like livestock, so you don't run away, right? They got to keep you addicted there. So that's a hard design problem because you're building a product for two orthogonal audiences. That's a very hard design problem. They work very hard in Silicon Valley, right? We only have half of that to do. But we're also starting from a different place. So no, this will not do everything that Facebook does. I'm not just talking about the surveillance. But hopefully, if we can get the core things you want to do, you want to share a photo of your newborn child with your friends and family, and you don't want to share with Mark Zuckerberg, we can do that, right? But you're entirely right. The core of your question, I think, if I may reinterpret it, is would anyone use a federated personal website? Does anyone wake up in the morning and say, I wish there was a federated personal website I could use? No, not one person. Unless we can compete on experience, but that doesn't mean creating all of the features that Facebook has. We don't even want to do that. But to design the features and the functionality that people want and want to use on a daily basis, that we can do, and that we don't need the billions and billions for. That we can do. And how will it be subsidized and how will it be funded? Now that's a very important question as well. You touched upon that. It cannot be funded by venture capital. They will just not fund this. They don't have the returns they need. How are we funding this? The city of Ghent is supporting us. So we're funding it from the commons for the common good. And this is something we have to stop being afraid of. The moment you mention that taxes are going to be used to benefit the people that paid the taxes, suddenly people start having like this aneurysm. It's why? That's what they're for, right? So let's start using what's in the commons for the common good. I've even had someone say, when we mentioned that it should be supported from the commons, they said, well, can't we crowdfund it? And I was like, wait a minute. You know, there's a name that we call crowdfunding things in the common interest from the commons. Exactly, taxation, right? So let's at least consider that as an option. But beyond that, what we're talking about here is building an ethical core on which we can build an ethical economy. So all of those people providing the hosting, they're going to be providing jobs for the people working there, right? They're going to be making money. They're going to be contributing to the economy. And if you want more than, for example, the basic service of how much space you have, we can't give unlimited space to everyone, then maybe you pay each one of those organizations. If you don't like what they're doing, you can move from one to the other because the system is interoperable. There's no lock-in. So what we're doing is we're providing an ethical core from the commons on which we can build an ethical economy, as opposed to what Silicon Valley has today, which is an unethical core on which we've built an unethical economy, which has given us the gross inequality that we have in the world today that is entirely unsustainable. So in Europe, let's do better. In Europe, let's at least explore the ethical alternatives, let's fund them, and let's support them if that's the future you want to live in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a bright note to end this part of the talk. I would like to propose that we go to the panel, which is being chaired by Erik Mannes. And he's a professor at Ghent University for the ID Lab, and everything that's there to learn about open data, big data, and semantic web I got from him or the people he trained, so yeah. And then I would like to invite Marianne Schreurs, Paolo, and Carl Philippe to join us for the panel.
Thank you. Will they be using these microphones? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Tot kwart over of zoiets? Ja. All right. Okay, let's get started very quickly. First of all, setting the scene, so I would say very quickly, introduce yourself, but primarily why are you on the panel for inclusive?
My name is Marianne Schreurs. I'm chair of the Knowledge Society Forum, so they made me come here. No, I really love to come to all the KSF meetings because we really want to make a change.
Okay. Carl Philippe?
So the wrap-up was already there. I totally agree with the last sentences said.
I'm not a politician. So I am replacing Mayor Termont, who is in, I don't know where, I think Malmö at the moment. He's been traveling a lot lately, and we have been trying to find politicians in the city hall, but they're all busy. So I'm the guy who has to represent Ghent. Just kidding, of course. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of the City of Ghent. I'm also responsible for policy participation, City of People concept, and so on. So I'm really happy to be on this panel.
Hi, everybody. In Torino, the politicians are not busy. I am a politician. I am Paola Pisano, Deputy Mayor in charge of Innovation and Smart City in Torino Council. Thank you for the invitation.
Okay. Yeah, first, maybe a bit of definitions. What does inclusive democracy mean for you, or for your city, or for your region, and what does it not mean?
Maybe I should apologize, but I'm also a politician. An inclusive city means that, in a way, everybody and every part of the city has to take responsibility for the whole. So also enterprises, also organizations dealing with whatever what they are dealing with, and all the inhabitants and visitors. And the second thing is, part of it is that everybody should be able to participate, and then I borrow it from Albert, as a subject and not as an object. And basically what it means, what it shouldn't be neoliberal, because neoliberalism inhibits being a society as such. You know the famous quote from Margaret Thatcher, there's no such thing as society. She was a big neoliberal, and neoliberal really divides people up. What you get is that in the end, everything is reduced to being an economic purpose and nothing else. And everybody is asking themselves all the time, am I in or am I out? And for example, what you see within the data subjects, the data that are gathered, data are a construct, so they are only gathering data that are of importance, and the only data that are of importance is that reduces to being a consumer and nothing more. And that's a very small thing of being a human being. So that's the reason that we really have to go for an alternative.
So how do you already implement that, or is it still a vision?
No, we implement it. For example, I'm creating a kind of commons public space, and I do it by digitalizing my lights, so smart lighting, and it's just a means. And what we did in the procurement, we said, well, no vendor lock-in, no technology lock-in, data are owned by the ones who generate them themselves, and the most important thing, we want to see the algorithms involved. And it's a co-creation process, local, with local solutions created by all the stakeholders. So it's really a design process.
So for you, it's all about transparency then, most of the time?
Yes, and from the start, including all the decisions that befit, that are actually cultural decisions. The real question you must ask from technology is, what do I want to do with it? And people always think that technology is something that creates itself, but that isn't. There are always cultural decisions taken. So for instance, what I said about the data gathering, the data gathered are a cultural decision on what data do I find important to have, and that's the same that we should ask in all the things that we are developing. Which data are of any interest whatsoever? Do they make us, do they add to quality of life? And if that's not the result, then they shouldn't be there.
Okay. Up to the really politician, very eloquative. Karel Flip, is it for you or for the city of Ghent? Okay, we already heard Aral, but maybe you have another point of view as well.
Well, your question was actually on the definition of inclusive democracy, and I have to be honest, I had to look it up. because it's not something that we use as a concept, inclusive democracy, and it is an existing scientific concept actually. A guy named Professor Fotopoulos invented it, and it was really interesting. I read it in 2 minutes now.
Okay. Well, give the crowd the real definition of inclusive then.
And it is actually something that we are trying to do in Ghent. The inclusive democracy concept talks about 4 realms: the political realm, the economic realm, the social realm, and the environmental realm. And to those realms are also forms of democracy attached. And those forms of democracy are in crisis at this moment because of the neoliberalism and the failure of nation states and so on and so on. And a new balance has to be reached on those 4 realms. And on the political democracy realm, that means that a new balance has to be found between representative democracy and participative democracy. So, and that is what we were talking about until now, and what we are talking about within Eurocities on the future of Europe and the future of cities in Europe. Finding that new balance in democracy on all those different aspects. When we are talking about the commons, and it's an old concept, the commons, but it's also a very recent concept. It is being redefined. It touches upon all those 4 realms. What is the place of the commons, of commoners, of people within those 4 realms? Political, economic, social, and environmental. And we have to rethink the way that we think about and work with democracy and with people in those 4 realms. And that is really important to us, to work on those 4 realms at the same time and to redefine the way that we think about those different forms of democracy.
Yeah, but okay, aren't you forgetting then all the different kind of people as well? Is that not one of the axes as well, like tech savvy, non-tech savvy, gender, age?
I'm not talking about tech yet. We're talking about the way society is organized and the way decisions are being taken in society. Who is taking them, based on which data, on which basis, what is being done with those decisions, and what's the societal impact of all those decisions. And so the starting point is that we are creating a society for all, not a society that is segregated in different ways. Democracy has to be there for everybody in different forms.
And Ghent is already taking a few steps in all 4
I think all of our cities are taking a few steps in that direction, but the clue is that we have to take them together now, that we have to create a future for Europe together based on a vision for the future of Europe. And the starting point is the fact that we are cities, and cities represent their citizens. They are closest to the citizens. So we can take the first step as cities in creating a new democracy for Europe.
Okay. Italy?
Okay.
What is it to you, inclusive?
Yes, we based our inclusive democracy on 2 important ingredients for us. The first is give the same chance to everybody inside our city. And the second thing is that we need to create the right condition in order to involve our citizen in process and in the decision and in the project of the public administration. So from one side we really try to inject in the social ecosystem the potential to create new activity and to involve our citizens in restructuring and recreating social ecosystem. And from the other side, we start using tool and best practice in order to involve citizens in our decision process. For example, transparency. For example, improve our communication. For example, using a smart tool like a new platform that can help citizens to participate to political life of our city.
Okay, directly, okay, yes?
Maybe democracy as such is just a topic that you do with a beer. The interesting thing is what is the issue at stake? So it's more or less what is really the problem is not the social thing that is happening. The real problem is that the Californian companies made such an amount of money that they are now going into care and into mobility. So they are virtually taking over, no, they're actually taking over our total society. And so, and in it you use...
Is that...
In it you use a lot of technology. So why it's so important that on the...
That might be true, but for example, let's say that, via an AI system, I will be treated better for my cancer, for example. What can be wrong with it, with that line of thinking?
No, it's not that being treated better is what they do. They use their data just to make actually everything that is related to care consumer orientated. So there is a big difference to what we do in Europe and the States. And what you saw was that our system also became more neoliberalistic, and we really have to end it, because in the end it's about taking care of people. So yes, it's about transparency, but it's also on the scale of Europe being able to have the technology actually to do the things that we want to do and not to be dependent on others creating the technology. So that's the reason that we are very much looking in how within the European framework we really can create solutions on the European scale in which you have enough technology to be a competitor, and also the, how do you call it, the legislation to make it work. For instance, the new privacy regulations, and I really want the algorithms investigated, and that you still are able to create localized results. But the investment on the European level has to be huge, so we don't not only need an ethical design, we also need the money to create the technology to be a global player.
Yes, that is, yeah,
and
that is
otherwise
true.
you can say, yes, we can be, you have no issue with your democracy. If you are not able to be, if you are dependent, democracy walks out the door.
True, okay. Now, to maximize this inclusive democracy for the moment, let's start with Italy first now, the other way around. What current instruments do you already have to enhance civic participation or public consultation, to do the right planning or to do good decision making or implementation of your processes? What real tools or what do you already have in place, or now or in the
yes.
future?
We have online tools. The first tools that we are using now is this platform that is, the name is Decidi Torino. That is mean that the citizen of Torino can take decision on their city. We made this project with the collaboration of Madrid. In Madrid they have Decide Madrid, and then we have also another platform that is Decide Barcelona. So it's a big movement of this platform. That
this is the bottom-up approach, participatory decisions that
it's a bottom-up approach, yes, where citizens can talk about the issues that are important for them inside in our cities. Then they can
also put budget to it.
They can submit their own project, and if they are supported by 5,000 other citizens, the public administration need to start a process in order to analyze this project, analyze the feasibility of this project, and then do the project. If, of course, we have money to do it, because the big problem for Torino Council in this moment are money. And so citizens can submit projects, of course, and we can also ask to the citizen with this within this platform, their opinion and their feedback on our project. So we put in this platform our project, the project of public administration, and we try to incorporate feedback of citizens. And so this is our first tool. Okay. Then we have other tools that we use, like we use, I don't know if the translation is correct, but we involve citizens with the table, in a table of co-design of projects and services, but also we involve citizens in order to have their opinion on problems that are around the city. So the offline of the same thing that we do online with the City Torino. And,
so it's both tech and non-tech.
Exactly.
To do the inclusiveness. Okay.
And then we use data, of course. We have 4 platforms of where we manage data. One platform, we are collecting now data of the cities in order to understand the services and the life of in our city divided for different areas. So we give them.
Is this sensor data, or what kind of data is that?
Is data related to services, to environmental characteristics of our cities, data related to, for example, the number of schools, data related to the income of that area, and data related on how the citizens live some area of our city. And we try to give back this information to the citizen in order to give the information around their city and the information around how they live their city. This project, the name is City Map. And we are starting collecting all the data and organizing this data as a storytelling. So this data will support us in our storytelling of city to the citizens. So this is for us the new communication that we need to involve the citizen in our project. Then if I can have only one second more, the other platforms are around sentiment analysis. So we analyze the noise of the citizen, what they write in the social network, always privacy compliant, because we don't know the name, and we analyze data in a group of 10 string of data. And so we analyze which is the sentiment of our citizen around the big issue in our city. For example, last year we know that our citizens spoke more about the security than about the pollution. And so we understand the mood of our city and the social problem. We understand bullyism, in which area of our city the bullyism is more high. And then we do action.
Okay. In Ghent, how do we do it?
Yeah, we have a lot of similar projects and applications. Of course, I think most European cities are working on these kinds of applications. There are a lot of European projects where we work together, but what we started to do a couple of years ago, there were a lot of questions from city departments, but also other public organizations to create participation websites. So for us, the starting point was, let's first create a common language. Let's create a common language on priorities. How do we define priorities? What are the priorities for our city? And how do we operationalize them? That was the starting point, to create that common framework and common language.
You got these priorities bottom up from the public?
Yes, they are co-created now. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow, so I'm not going to give too much information. But the second step was, how do we react to all those questions to create participation websites? When we have already that strategic framework, we could use that and create building blocks, open building blocks within applications that everybody needs to create participation websites. So actually Digipolis created a toolbox for us with those building blocks that everybody can use to create, and with everybody I mean in the first place the public administration, the local authority, but also citizens, that everybody can use to create their own participation websites on a certain priority. And advantage of that is that we can also capture all those signals and relate them to the priorities within our common strategic and shared strategic framework. So that participation platform, as we call it, it's not actually a platform, it's a Lego box of different components. It's really crucial for us to build further on the strategy that we already have developed. But what is really important as well is that there is a balance between online and offline. And to constantly work on that is the most important thing that we are doing. So for instance, we created on that participation platform a citizen budget application, a citizen budget that was launched last year with a lot of inspiration of other Eurocities members like Cologne and Gdansk. But we launched it on a city-wide level with 1.5 million euros that was available. And it was really open. We launched it both online and offline. It was a big challenge to get something integrated online and offline. It worked. It had a couple of downsides, but it worked. But I'll leave it at that because I could give other examples, but it's not us.
And in Holland?
Well, in Eindhoven.
In Eindhoven.
We are very big in design, and that means that we co-create solutions with all the stakeholders, with all the citizens, and so preferably you avoid also discussions afterwards and legal issues. And one of the nicest examples was that we, in the redevelopment of a part of the city, we asked people from realize your dream. So it was not with project developers, but really the end users realizing their dream. And the wonderful thing was, in the end, it was everything could fit together. So the basic notion is, it isn't hard to live together because in the end you can do it together. And if you look at...
Can you give a real example of something that now is really working there then?
So this part of the city is now being, the stones are, everything is now almost ready. So the basic thing is we create the city together, and in it
but very concretely, did they want more trees or bigger pathways, or what came out of this?
Normal, you make all the rules and regulations, and for example, some things are not possible. So if you work and if you produce something and you also have food there and also you live there, it wouldn't have been possible in normal circumstances. We have banned it from up front, and now it was part of a development and everything. Well, you create a lot of mixing of functions, and that's actually what gives a city life. So normally we say, yes, this is possible, this is possible, this is possible, and now we said just do it, and it works.
More organic.
More organic, yeah.
Okay.
So let people actually realize their dreams means that they are able to do that together, and that is a very hopeful result for being able to create a city together. Mm-hmm. And if you then look at the digital tools, they are just that, they are digital tools. But in the end, they allow us to, on the scale of the city as a whole, have a conversation on what do we actually want to be as a city. And we have not done that. We have websites on sustainability and all kinds of things, platforms. But in the end, we are not achieving, let me put it more bluntly, we are failing at being a society on the net. And what I find breathtaking interesting is what is developing in the south, because there you see that also because of the economic circumstances, people were, well, they had to do things together, be a society more than up in the north. And that is now also put into the stories of the city. And in the end, if you put all the individual stories in the city together, you really have the city. And also it changes all the time. I have an artist from Greece, and she talks about the little odyssey that everybody has. If you have the little odyssey of every inhabitant and participant in the city together, you get a feeling from what this city is about. And in the end, it's up to us to create the cultural decisions together for where the city should be going, especially in this.
But is that enough to go future-proof for, let's say, 20 years? Don't you also need a grand scheme of things to help you?
Yeah, of course we did the roadmaps. So we have a technological university, and together with the technological university, we're doing a lot of calls, European calls, and a lot of pilots, and also with other parties. And what you see is that there are so many of them that we are creating an urban development institute together. But so that's really to make things, to upscale in the city technology-wise, but in a technology that works for people. Yeah. So the most
constantly feedback loops from grand scheme of things, bottom-up approach from small citizens.
Yeah, and that's actually the part that we have to arrange in a better fashion. So it's not only bottom up, but also how do you get from bottom up to a general vision on what your culture want to be your city to become. And that's the real political issue. So if you are talking about politics, it's about...
Is that the main challenge still to be taken? Because that's going to be my last question to the panel due to timing constraints. Yeah. What is still the biggest challenge out there, or the biggest hurdle to be taken to have the ultimate inclusiveness, for example? What is this the main hurdle to you? This how do you call it? This the in between vision from top and the bottom-up approach?
No, the real problem is how are we able together to decide, and foremost you decide in the doing, in the creation, but also you need a set of rules. And you have to agree on a set of rules. So to agree on a set of rules, do things, and also, well, it's a feedback loop. Yeah. And that is really a problem, because you want those set of rules not just being the techies, not being the elite. You want it really to be something that is from everybody.
And it must be the citizens, not, let's say, just data that takes the decision. If you have thousands of sensors out there producing values, then that's some algorithm say, we have to do that.
Well, one of the rules that I stated, totally top-down, it should be human-driven and not data-driven. Because we are human beings, we are not objects, we are subjects.
Okay. Ghent?
Yeah, data is there to support decisions, not to decide what we should do. So that's easy.
What's the biggest hurdle?
The biggest hurdle is governance, the governance of our society. If I have to look at it from a top-down approach, we as a government still have the illusion that we create society. It's not true. We're overtaken and overrun by other actors and other players. So governance is really important. What is our role as a government? What is the role of other actors in society? And how should we work together to create that society of the future, and in our case, that city of the future? That is the biggest hurdle. And once we've solved that, and we have a clear position on what each other's role could be, we can build further, and we can decide what the role of technology is in that society, who owns the data, although that's not a good question, but who can work with that data, what the priorities are in our society, and so on. But the governance is most important, and is the biggest hurdle, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. The final word. You have the final word.
Yes, hard question. I think that it's really important to incorporate the feedback of the citizen, because if you want to have a very competitive city, you have to give to the citizen the city that they will expect, where they live better, where they have a good relationship, a good services, and all these things. For doing this, the big problem are to The first thing is that the public administration has to give to the citizen, to attract the citizen to participate to the model. And for asking participation, you have to give to the citizen something that he or she doesn't have alone. Okay. The second thing is that if you want that the citizen play with you, you have to leave him or her decide something. And this is the big issue.
Reward.
For us. Decide, participate to the process of the decisional process. So the governance. If you ask the citizen to give the feedback to you, then if he or she gives you the feedback, you need to listen to that feedback. You need to involve the citizen. You need to give him the potential to do what he or she wants to do. This is the problem. It's a problem of governance, I think.
Okay, governance. Thank you.
Okay. And I don't have the solution.
Well, for the solutions, I think we need to look at fiction. And I'm very glad that in the preparation of this and based on the inspiration we gathered from the last meeting, we were talking about science fiction and what role it plays in the topics we address in our work in the forum. So we were very happy to find Etienne Auger, our next speaker, who's actually making a job out of talking on science fiction. And I think no movie was ever made about changing cables for a presentation. Huh? Okay.
Working? Working? Yep. All right. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're very tired because it was a heavy day, but still I need to ask you a question, very personal question. How many of you guys like science fiction? Show me a hand. How many of you guys like science fiction? Do you like science fiction, sir? Yeah, kind of. Okay, raise your hand. All right. You notice that when you say you like science fiction, usually people are very doubtful. Usually it seems like a little bit coming out of the closet, like saying, I like science fiction and the world has to deal with it. When I was young, I would only read science fiction. I love science fiction. I grew up with science fiction. And then I became a scholar in academia. I never told anyone I like science fiction, because I assumed that people would actually judge me based on this. So today I'm wearing a jacket, which is what every scholar is supposed to wear, so I look very serious. But still, I need to tell you about science fiction and what science fiction has done for me, what science fiction can do for you. First of all, when it comes to science fiction, of course, many people have different interpretation of what it is. But I think the reason why people think science fiction is not serious is because of this. Usually the cover of science fiction magazines are designed to please to young adults living in the basement of their parents. I'm not completely sure, but science fiction is something very serious. There is an excellent definition of science fiction by Mr. Norman Spinrad. Science fiction is anything published as science fiction. And I would agree with him, and I defy you to not agree with him. But if you want to go further, if I have to define science fiction, part of the reason I like it so much is that it's very hard to define. It doesn't have borders. You cannot really put science fiction in a box. But I would say science fiction is doing two things mostly, and probably the first effect science fiction, you know, it's inventing. Most of the devices that you're using right now have been invented in science fiction, have been seen in science fiction. For instance, do you have any idea who saw the internet, the first one, at the end of the 19th century? Do you know who actually came up with the idea of the internet? It's Mark Twain. At the end of the 19th century, he wrote a little short story when he was speaking about a device that would, all the screens on the planet would actually communicate, and he was one of the first ones to speak about the internet. So I like science fiction because, first of all, it's about inventing. It's about stimulating us to invent. Like I say, many things have been invented by science fiction. And science fiction is also a way to deal with the problems we have using reason, using science, using technology, and not so much religion or philosophy. So it's a very positivist movement coming from the 19th century. But I would say this idea of science fiction as a way to invent things is probably the most famous. But the second one I like the most, probably, is the idea of preventing. Usually, when I'm to explain science fiction, I say science fiction can invent and prevent. And prevent is also a very important aspect of science fiction. Science fiction is there to tell us that if we keep on doing things the way we do, we're going to screw up bad. So this idea of preventing is something that you find in science fiction quite a lot. Why is science fiction so important? Again, every time I speak about science fiction, at first I get this look like, are you sure it's something serious? And I say, yeah, it's that serious. Why is science fiction so important? For instance, first of all, if you look at this chart, you will see that this is the list of the top grossing movies of all time, at least Hollywood movies. If you look at this chart, you can see that most of these movies in the top 20, they are science fiction, or bad science fiction, aka fantasy like Harry Potter. Avatar, for instance, is the highest grossing movie of all time. And then you have Titanic, not really science fiction, but still. Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Marvels, Thor Avenger, all those movies, they belong to science fiction. So science fiction is taken very seriously in Hollywood. And if it's taken very seriously in Hollywood, maybe we should take it seriously. But Hollywood is not the only organization in the world which is considered science fiction to be of interest. Many institutions are using science fiction to try and understand what the future may hold. To also try to have a certain control on the future, which may be a good idea. The CIA, for instance, hired many writers to help them understand what the future will be about. You have the CIA, but also you have the Pentagon. The Army, the US Army, considers science fiction to be of tremendous importance in order to know what the future holds for the US Army. The US Army, of course, is in charge of killing people, but also they are the first line of defense in case a catastrophe is going to happen. They want to know what could happen in the future, and believe it or not, the army has a scenario in case of an alien invasion. They take that very seriously. Someone who took science fiction very seriously is also Mr. Reagan. If you're not convinced of why science fiction is important, maybe you should know this story that was actually told by Norman Spinrad, the fella that said that science fiction is anything published as science fiction. And he's telling the following story. He said that in the 80s, there was a convention of science fiction writers, and Star Wars was just out. So actually it was more the end of the 70s, sorry. And they said, well, wouldn't it be cool to have like a real live Star Wars? And they started to speak about it, to elaborate on it, all those science fiction writers, all those geeks. And someone was there that was listening very carefully. And he actually went back some years after. He went to see Ronald Reagan. He was an aide to Ronald Reagan. And he said, well, actually, I've heard this idea of a real-life Star Wars. And I think maybe we should give it a shot. And Ronald Reagan played a game. He actually pretended that the Americans were working on a real-life Star Wars, the SDI, that actually never truly existed. But it's rumored that it was part of a way to bring down the Soviet Union, because Soviet Union also took that very seriously. They say, if the Americans have a real-life Star Wars, maybe you should have one. They spend billions of rubles in their real-life Star Wars, and actually it seems that it was not a great idea. I think that what I like the most about science fiction, although I work in academia, is the fact that science fiction is inventing, is it preventing, and also asking a very simple question with a very complicated answer, which is what if? What if we could go to the moon? What if, just basically breaking down the barrier of today's thoughts. Today we are more and more confronted with shrinking of the thinking. The other job I have in academia, maybe I should mention it, is propaganda. My #1 research is propaganda. And propaganda is about convincing people that it's either black or white, it's good or evil, it's this or that, very binary. What I like about science fiction, the reason I need science fiction, and now I'm even teaching science fiction in university, is that science fiction is the exact opposite. It doesn't say, well, it's this or that. It's not even the sky is the limit. There's absolutely no limit. It's all about trying to understand what the future could be and also inventing the future and also preventing it, hopefully. A few problems with science fiction, though. A few things that I identify. First of all, most of the science fiction that we have access to is American. Science fiction in the beginning was co-invented by the French and the Brits at the very beginning. At the end of the 19th century, you had Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. They were sort of the co-inventor of science fiction. But very soon, the Americans took control over science fiction. And if you take control over the science fiction, basically take control over our futures. So today, the vast majority of science fiction that we have access to is American. That's one problem. But to me, this is probably the biggest problem. Diversity. When you say science fiction, just like almost every walk of life, it's mostly people like me, white, heterosexual dude, while devising the future. Somebody say, well, the problem of science fiction today is that because it's mostly written by white dudes, is that we're going to have flying cars, but no gender equality, because they don't care. And I really like this one, because if you look very carefully, if you focus, they say that of the 8 movies where the protagonist is of color, 6 are Will Smith. 6 are Will Smith. And it's actually a true story. Will Smith knew that science fiction was actually the most profitable genre in Hollywood. So when he decided that he didn't want to be the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air no more, he asked, well, he crunched the numbers, he realized that science fiction was the genre to be in Hollywood, and he became the science fiction guy in Hollywood. So 6 are Will Smith out of 8. So second problem, science fiction, first of all, is mostly American, and second, is mostly written by white guys. Third problem is that science fiction is inventing and preventing, but when you're reading a book, and not just science fiction, usually you don't read a book about happy people. Shiny happy people is a good song, but not a good book. So you want to know what's happening. You want to see a crisis. So science fiction is usually about some kind of a drama, something bad that is going to happen, not exactly a future that you want to be part of. And many people also take their inspiration from this kind of future. We spoke today about a lot of things about blockchains. It seems that some people like it, some people don't, if I understand correctly. But 1984, for instance, which is science fiction, by the way, is something that unfortunately inspired many people to invent a future that would look like 1984, and not to prevent the future like 1984. Today I was invited to speak about science fiction in cities, and during the talk we had a few months ago about what my presentation could be about, they say, well, can you speak about science fiction in cities? So I decided to roll a little movie for you guys so that you have an idea of what science fiction in cities can be like.
The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity and adventure.
skirmish has broken out between student protesters and riot police. There appear to be some casualties. Next.
Lived in our veins.
Of District 9, the refugee camp set up to separate aliens from the general population.
Cities in the future are not places where you want to live in. You probably recognize the first one, Metropolis, as soon as 1927. This is not a place where we want to live in. 1927, Fritz Lang is showing us a city where the very rich, them fat cats, are living on top of the buildings and the rest of the people are living down. Metropolis is a city of a nightmare. That's what Fritz Lang wanted to warn us about. This is what he wanted to prevent as early as 1927. The second one we saw is Minority Report. Minority Report in 2002, adapted from a novel by Philip K. Dick, is a place also where you don't want to live, because even before you're going to commit a crime, they're going to arrest you because they have special precogs which are able to detect when you're going to commit a crime. So even before you become a criminal, you will go to prison. Probably not a place where we like to live. The third example is my personal favorite, Blade Runner 1982, the original version, not the new light version that was released last year. Blade Runner also is a place that is constantly, there is no sun, it's constantly raining, it's constantly dark, and it's a place also that nobody wants to live in because everybody's trying to escape to another planet. Next example was Neo Tokyo in Akira in 1988. Well, it's quite simple. There was an atomic bomb, so yeah, also not a place where you want to live. And District 9, 2009, a movie from South Africa, is showing a city where the aliens are segregated, they live in their own ghetto, and the rest of the population doesn't want to mix with them. Finally, one that was not in this clip, Mega City 1 by Judge Dredd. You can see that this city, Mega City 1, in those giant towers, hundreds of thousands of people are living, or actually more like surviving. Are these cities of the future? I said in the beginning that science fiction is inspiring people. It's about inventing and preventing, but very few people understand this idea of preventing. Most people think that if it's a Hollywood movie, it's cool, and then we should do just like in a Hollywood movie. And so you get this, you get Dubai, also trying to have the highest tower in the world. I was saying before that science fiction is mostly written by white guys. It seems that the idea of erecting very high towers is very masculine. This is Dubai right now. This is supposed to be Dubai in 2020. Even higher, even bigger. Let's see who's got the biggest one. Actually, maybe in Doha. Doha also believe that the skyscrapers is the future, that a real city of the future should be about big towers. And if you go to Saudi Arabia, they want to build the Kingdom Tower, which is going to be more than 1 kilometer high. They also want to beat the UAE and Doha. But again, science fiction is telling us that if you keep building very high skyscrapers, if you don't think that the sky is the limit, problems may arise, as we can see in High Rise. First, a movie by J.G. Ballard, and then a movie. Olympus is an interesting one, because Olympus is actually a perfect city. Olympus is described in Appleseed, which is an anime, first a manga and then an anime by Masamune Shirow. And Masamune Shirow is describing Olympus as the absolute perfect city. As you can see, it's a place where you would like to live. It's beautiful. It's got a lot of parks. It's very human. No skyscrapers, not so much. And it's run by an artificial intelligence. The only problem is that at some point, the artificial intelligence believed that the main problem of Olympus is the humans. They are the problems. So the artificial intelligence decided to kill all the humans so that we can have the perfect city. I'm concerned about science fiction today. I'm concerned about mainstream science fiction. I'm very concerned when, for instance, I teach science fiction, or people know that I'm into science fiction, and they say, oh, do you like Black Mirror? To which I say, of course not. I do not like Black Mirror. How can you like it? It's horrible. It's a vision of the future that is a nightmare. First of all, Black Mirror is ripping off the best TV shows in the world, like Community. And second, Black Mirror is describing a future where I don't want to be part of. Nobody wants a future like Black Mirror. So of course, Black Mirror is considering that the future is scary and maybe trying to prevent this future. But there's no inspiration at all in Black Mirror. I'm concerned about this philosophy of fear, and if there could be something that I would like to recommend to people to maybe don't like science fiction but would like to know more about fear, it's this documentary by Adam Curtis. Adam Curtis is this genius filmmaker from Great Britain. He worked for the BBC, and he gave us several documentaries which are absolutely mind-blowing, and in this one he's explaining why we are more and more scared. We're scared of the present, therefore we are scared of the future. We don't want to be part of this future that is described as some kind of nightmare, and he speaks about the power of nightmares. I would say it's no surprise that Nazi Germany, who between 1933 and 1945 produced more than 1,100 movies, which is quite a lot, they never produced a single movie about science fiction. They didn't want to project the future, the world in the future. They wanted to go back in the past. For them, science fiction was horrible. It was actually decadent. And it seems that more and more we share their vision of the future, something that we don't want to be part of. Reinventing utopias. We speak about the perfect future. We speak about what kind of future we would like to be part of. But the problem is that we also consider that utopia are dead, because after the Cold War, when the West won, well, it was the clear sign that utopias didn't work, that there's only one way for us, and that's definitely propaganda. I am not a communist. I'm just saying that maybe there's a different way to live than the way that is imposed to us through nightmares. Reinventing Utopia also asks what we want. I always find it very interesting wherever I go that people have so different opinions. It was interesting to see this debate about blockchain, how enthusiastic you were and how much you hated it. Maybe we can try to find a way to also understand what would be the best for society, but so far I'm not sure that we have this kind of discussion. Solon the Athenian is probably my favorite lawmaker. Before becoming a historian, I wanted to become a lawyer because of this guy. And Solon the Athenian, who obviously lived a long time ago in ancient Greece, was asked one time, what is the best form of government? And he answered very simply, first of all, you have to tell me for whom and when. There's not like one form of government, one form to lead humans that will be the best and that will be universal. If you speak about something even larger than science fiction, you can see that also a great way to inspire people through Hollywood movies, we have the exact same problem, which is diversity. And I speak about real diversity. I think it's absolutely amazing that if you want to inspire people and you only have 1.9 female directors in Hollywood, yeah, it's not going to work, that's for sure. I'm not speaking about diversity in order to be politically correct. I'm just saying if we really want to envision a future where everybody is part of it, where actually everybody has a say in it, then maybe we should work on it in the present already. What we do, because it's always very easy to criticize. Part of what I do is I run a research center in my university. And one of the exercises I'm asking my students to do is called the science fiction prototyping. And science fiction prototyping is about telling students, which are 19, 20, that they will be in charge of the future. So the science fiction prototyping is about asking them to project themselves 10 years in the future and to tell me what the future not could be, but what it should be, which is a major difference. It's not about predicting the future. Science fiction is not there to predict the future, inventing and preventing. And the science fiction prototyping is there not to tell what the future could be, which is what the CIA or Shell are doing, but what it should be, to sort of reappropriate the future. I like this idea of re-enchanting the future, and add a very nice clip which I think we're going to ditch because you're all very tired. It comes from a pretty bad movie called Tomorrowland. I don't know if you've seen it. I was very enthusiastic before it. It was a very great idea. It was really about, it's a Walt Disney movie, by the way, you know, one of these companies that was denounced before. But it was really about re-enchanting the future, about saying, well, maybe the future could be a place where everybody could be part of it. Sounds very poetic, sounds very corny, sounds very geeky to a certain extent. But that's also the power of science fiction. So I think we're going to skip this one, and I would like to thank you very much for your attention. See you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think re-enchant the future could be the marching orders for all of us, for all the work we have to do. So thank you much for that inspiration and to put everything into perspective. As you know by now, we like to balance things. So we looked at the future, or at least had this overview how the future is being looked upon. We would like to invite you all to join us to visit the past. And to go see the Adoration of the Lamb in the cathedral. So let's say we convene in 5 minutes outside of City Hall, and from there there's some free time, and the people who are invited for dinner, it's again here, same entrance at 8 o'clock. Thank you very much for your attention. Keep following us. We have similar events in the future, so we can keep you all posted. And thank you for all of us, all the panelists and all the speakers. Thank you.